Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's council meeting. And we'll begin with our land acknowledgement. We would like to acknowledge we are meeting on the traditional lands and treaty territory of the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation, which includes the Chippewas of Nawash, unceded First Nation, and the Chippewas of Saugeen First Nation. We also recognize the Métis, whose ancestors shared this land and these waters. We extend our gratitude to all Anishinaabe and Métis peoples and their descendants, past, present, and future, who continue to care for and inhabit these lands and tend these waters. And I'll ask you to just join me in a moment of reflection on today's business. Thank you. Councillor Tony Bell indicated he would not be able to be present this morning, but we do have quorum, and just ask at this point if there's any declaration of pecuniary interest. And seeing none, I think we're ready to proceed with our education session this morning. So I'll turn it over to CAO Rob Armstrong.
Thank you, Worship. So for a few housekeeping matters first. Similar to Monday, I think the intent is we'd like to keep this fairly informal, not necessarily to go through the chair. If you have a question, raise your hand during the presentation. It's better to deal with it as we go through it than wait till the end, so we will do that. Although this meeting was scheduled to be a full day session, as you had your training last week and we built the presentations, we tried to avoid some duplication. Our anticipation that this will probably end early afternoon. It's not going to be an all-day session based on the extent of the presentation. So sorry, Rob, I know you wanted to be here all day. You can drag it out by continuing to ask more questions. I'll get that way. So the first three are going to be delivered by myself. The first one normally wouldn't be, but in the absence of having an HR manager who probably could explain this a lot better than I could, I will fill in for them at this point in time. For the first three, me, and then Val and I will sort of tag team the budget. And then I'll be turning it over to Matt and Margaret, I assume, for the customer service communication side. So kicking off with human resources. So first off, forgot the clicker over here. Just want to explain what the human resources division consists of. It's basically two individuals working under the CAO. So we have a manager position. Those that would have been around would remember Sean Morphy was our manager of HR. Left us to go to a good position as director of HR for the county of Bruce. Couldn't, but really enjoyed his time here. And I know he worked with councils on a couple of initiatives over the period of time of him being here. We're very close, and hopefully we'll be able to announce shortly a replacement for Sean in the HR manager position. It's been a challenge, and as it's one of those positions that every community is struggling to get qualified individuals to replace. But they're such a critical position to the organization to lead the HR with experience. So, and then you heard from Hannah, on the health and safety on Monday. She's our human resources coordinator. So those are the two positions fulfilling it. Just to highlight some of the tasks that HR performs. They implement and modify the HR policy. In your USB, you will see a extensive policy of the HR policy. I will highlight that policy was developed back in the early 2010-11 era. We have made adjustments where necessary, but there's a real desire, but it requires a major commitment to do a major overhaul of that HR policy. So basically, as legislation changes, the HR manager and coordinator bring adjustments to those policies to staff or to the director team for our consideration, discussion, and then one of the things that's been delegated to myself as CAO to approve any modifications to the HR policy manual. They are responsible, as you heard the presentation from Hannah, they're responsible for implementation and updating the health and safety program. We've got it quite extensive, but that falls under their bailiwick. It's quite an undertaking. You heard the responsibilities we have and everything that's in place for that. So you can understand the time commitment required, how we can get in trouble if we don't have a very robust health and safety program. They are involved in the full scope of recruitment, both from advertising, assisting in interviews, and then on recruitment, the onboarding side, to make sure when staff start, they have all the necessary resources that they need to fulfill their jobs. Corporate training, all the corporate training that's undertaken. So the harassment in the workplace, all those other trainings, we do some corporate computer training. They coordinate that for all other staff and make sure that we're meeting our obligations in delivering that. Workplace investigations, we've had to undertake a few. If there's a complaint from someone with regard to something that's happened, we have to do an investigation, and that's usually led by the HR manager position in undertaking it and reporting back to myself for any actions that are required. I know that council has been involved quite some years ago on some workplace investigations and had a report from our HR manager in that regard. They maintain all employee records, very important aspect of documentation and file management, should something be required in the future with regard to any activity. Performance reviews. Two aspects to this. One is they have helped set up a performance review system for all staff. We've determined that a one size does not fit all. A performance review you would do for a manager is a lot different than a performance review that you would do for a operator or something like that. So we had them work through a process to develop a system that meets the objectives of the type of performance review that we need to do. Employment engagement and recognition. It's very important that employees feel engaged outside their just normal work environment, and they do help lead us through certain aspects. Example, they set up an event where a bunch of us went to a hockey game. Everybody paid their own way, but it was a great collaboration of staff to get together and engagements. And there's other things we do. Our infamous pumpkin carving competition. There's a real staff departmental competition on that we always have at Halloween, and that type of stuff is very important, but does take resources to coordinate and make those arrangements. And also the last thing I'll mention is the manager is a member of our director team. A lot of the things that as the director team we deal with are matters of HR, and it's very important to have them at that team as we talk about different aspects. So that just gives you a bit of a high-level scope of those things that the human resources team looks after. Yes.
So may I ask, does every employee in the corporation get an annual performance review or a biannual performance review?
There is the formal annual performance review that is done. Yes. One thing we encourage though is more regular check-ins with staff. So it could be bi-weekly meetings with staff. It could be monthly meetings. But there's the one formal annually, but we strongly encourage that a good manager will be meeting with staff on a regular basis. If issues arise, you don't want to wait the 1 year to the 1 year performance review to have those discussions and deal with the issue up front if there is. Yeah.
Can I just ask also about performance? I'm sorry, about recognition like I said, do we recognize anniversaries? That is the
correct. Yeah, we in the HR policy, and that's been in place since I came. After 5, 10, 15, we have certain recognitions. We used to just do those annually at our Christmas luncheon, but we now are doing those quarterly as part of our all staff meetings, because someone could just have an anniversary and then retire, and then by the time we get to Christmas, they've been retired and gone. So we're doing them more regularly to stay current with that aspect.
Other questions?
Yeah.
Thanks, Ross, and good morning, Rob. I'm just wondering if council could have an updated org chart and perhaps with names and where people are and their contacts, because there's been a lot of changes in staff over the last few months. So I just wondered if we could have an updated.
Typically we do. I'll wait till we get these. There's a few new positions that are that have been filled. So as soon as we get those done, we'll reshare the org chart on the names. We don't publicly share the names with our org chart is public, but the names we typically just share those with council and can provide that with you just so you know who's working where. Yeah. Yeah. One thing I forgot to mention, the one performance review that council is very much involved in that's the performance review of myself. About 3 years ago, we brought a report and are using the Canadian Association of Municipal Administrators performance review system. So council adopted that as one of the policies. You'll see it on your USB stick. So the HR manager will help lead that process of performance review myself. And you'll be involved. The anniversary is around, I think it's May. So we'll be into that in probably May. It's a process where there'll be a questionnaire sent to you with a bunch of questions. And then there's follow-up with the HR manager. And then there's a review committee of 3 set up to meet with myself to go over the findings of that performance review. And then I come and meet with council to talk about everything as I prepare from the feedback that comes through the performance review. So that system will go through in May, and the HR manager will lead that process with council. The next slide speaks of council as leader of people. Bit of a preamble and why that is in the HR slide deck. And in particular, I'd like to elaborate why it is important. I'll go through these in a second. And I took it from a Municipal World article, Christina Benti who was a former mayor and is now a speaker. She had an article and I took some of the stuff from there. I'll go through that. But why it's important is for council to understand that your actions in a public format really send the message to a greater community and can affect our recruitment possibilities. I think back to a number of years ago and you know, Meaford was very much in the press and probably not in a good way. And it really affects the potential to recruit. When I say this, I will say that we believe that municipality of Meaford right now is an employer of choice in the area to some degree. There are challenges, but this is not a statement of a problem in the organization or with council. It's more of an awareness that as we proceed, just be aware of these things, that it can have a rippling effect on HR matters and recruitment of qualified individuals. And then at the same time can affect our ability to deliver services, which we're retained to do. So it's more just an intent to do that. Yes.
Sorry, Rob, for interrupting. I'm just wondering about a salary review process. Were we intending to undertake anything of that nature this year?
I have a separate slide deck speaking about the market review, and I can speak to that when I get to that. So, and timing for the next updated one on that. So, yeah. So what does that mean, and how do you bring that to council as a leader? You are board of directors. You're the spokespeople for, you're the decision makers for the community. For me, the big thing is these are all great items to just be aware of as you proceed through the business. We know that council at times will ask questions of staff. We know that council will take a different position and disagree with staff. That's perfectly fine. This is more about how you do that. We're not saying don't do that. We're just saying it's more about how you. It's about being respectful in that. So just highlighting some of the things that were on the slide. Council as a relationship builder, and I'll just read some of the verbiage that is in their article and sort of give some background on that. So in relationship builder, never underestimate the value of building relationships with each other, with staff, and with the greater community. The investment of time and energy on the front end will save you emotional angst on the back end. Disrespect, contempt, and personal attacks create unhealthy relationships that undermine sound governance. So that's really about being a relationship builder, team builder. A healthy governing body knows that each person was elected by the public as individuals, but they must work together as a team. Being an effective team player means being able to advocate for one's position while remaining curious and open-minded about the position of others. It also means that they work constructively with others without dominating the flow of information or ideas. Emotionally mature, local leaders need to be in tune with their own emotional state and know how it affects them. Given that they are required to make decisions in the best interest of the community, despite opposition, they must be able to withstand the criticism. Approachable, I think that's self-explanatory. You just need to be approachable. People need to discuss things with you. Listening carefully and understanding the concerns, the ideas, and the perspectives. Critical thinker, today's problems often come from yesterday's solutions. Elected officials should consider how to best limit shifting a problem into the future by maintaining a long-term perspective and considering the potential impact of decisions. So yeah, it might be easy to make that decision based on what can happen in the next year, but it's also, as we say, consider the long-term aspects of it. We know we've heard that over there. Be prepared. I know when I sat on the Ontario Professional Planners Institute board, the first thing we always read was an oath that I have come prepared for this meeting. I have done my research. I've read the documents. That's how you, as a true leader, can demonstrate your commitment and show that you are caring for what you're doing. And then financial acumen. Obviously, as a leader, you have financial oversight for the community, and it's just to understand. I know that finances can be complicated, and that we are here to spend the time to try to explain it to you so you can understand it, and that so you can understand just everything. And we'll go through budgeting 101 and some of the finance stuff and try to explain it to the best degree we can. And we will spend the time to help you understand it, because at the end of the day, you're making those budget decisions for the long term and need to understand that. So anyways, that's just a bit of an overview as councillors, the leader of people. Next, we move into council staff relations policy. It's on the USB again. There's the council code of conduct. There's under the HR policy manual, we have a staff code of conduct. Both those work collectively, but together they come under the staff relations policy. Under here, I just highlighted some key words. It's really about developing a positive and healthy workplace for its employees through promoting and nurturing good relations and communications between council and all levels of staff. That's the premise of it. Very basic. You know what, there's a bunch of other policies. There's the harassment policy, code of conduct, as I mentioned, and things like that. It's all them working together about just being good people and being respectful and that. And again, it's not like we have a problem here. It's just more reiterating those policies that are in place as we go forward. Under the council relations policy, it talks about the joint role of council and staff. It highlights our individual roles. the role of council, which really goes up to the Municipal Act. In the section, it refers to that. It speaks of the role of staff, and we as staff are here to provide our professional advice, our recommendations to council, and then council is the decision maker based on those recommendations. So it's just, we're highlighting the rest, those components. I know that you had a lot of background both on last week at the county sessions and also again on Monday on those two roles, but it is in our staff and council relations policy. It talks about the reporting relationship that really I'm the one that reports directly. It says more than me, it says myself and the directors. We are the reporting mechanism to council. A lot of times I'm not the subject matter expert on everything that we do. I need to rely on the directors, and we really are operate as a team working together and doing that. So there's no reason why you can't reach out to a director on a particular matter that is responsible for the question that you're having. Definitely do that. It has, again, refers to the code of conduct policies, speaks to discrimination, harassment, free workplace policies. There is the training for that. And then it also speaks, there's a section on under the procedural bylaw about just showing respect and how we do that. So just a reminder of those documents that are all applicable to how we continue to operate. There's been some questions and we decided we'd explain it again a bit, the difference between full-time and full-time equivalent. I know this came up during the election and we did a bit of a response to that. Basically, full-time equivalent positions is the number of jobs, whether it's full-time, which is one, or if you have a number of people working part-time. So if you have two people working half-time, then that's one full-time equivalent. It's two employees, but it is it's two employees. So the employee number goes up, but as an equivalent, it's only still one equivalent job. So that explains just some of the numbers. We have 82 full-time positions. And I think it said based on the 2021 data, we have 19.6 full-time equivalent jobs. Also in here about the volunteer firefighters, they end up, based on 32 volunteers, they end up being 3.3 equivalents based on the standard typical hours that they put in through a week. Any questions on that? Next, I'm going to run through some of the components of compensation. I know that the deputy mayor asked about when we're going to do another market check. So I'm going to sort of explain the compensation system that we work under. The first is the job evaluation system. Just check something here. The salary grid, I'm going to explain each one of these in more detail. The market check, the annual cost of living adjustment, and then our total compensation package. First up is the job evaluation system. So like many other municipalities in the area, this community back in the mid-2000s adopted the ML consultant system of job evaluation. ML stands for Marianne Love. She's the one that did our market check as well that council had a couple of years ago. But that's the system. When I was at Blue Mountains, that we were operating under the same system. What the basis of that system is there's you'll define very clearly through a number of items such as education, what's required for the job, who you provide oversight to. So you develop a job description for each particular job in the organization. That job is then job description, not the person, but the job description is evaluated based on a number of criteria that is her system. So it's based on experience, education, based on responsibilities, all those things I mentioned. So and then that gets ported over to the salary grid based on the number of points that are evaluated to that job. The purpose of having this system is to ensure a number of things. First and foremost, to ensure both internal equity, so that those people that are doing jobs are being paid in an equitable format to someone else that's doing a job. So you have a system. It's also going to ensure our compliance with the pay equity legislation, so that it's not based on who's doing the job. It's based, again, on the job. So it's ensuring the pay equity system. It also is ensuring market equity. And as we go through a market check to ensure that we're not haven't priced ourselves out of the market, that everybody around us is paying more than us, and we're that also will lead to our inability to recruit qualified individuals for those jobs that we need. And it also, the pay equity system also considers, and when I talk about our market check, as we went through that, council was very, and staff were very cognizant of our ability to pay. Obviously, at the end of the day, all these costs are borne by taxes or the user pay system, and we're very cognizant of that, and when we consider all of these. And just it just considers all of those elements as part of the job evaluation system. This is our salary grid. This is was in a document that was prepared early in, I think it was December of 2021, when we received the market check. So this is how it lays it out. It identifies the job and then the job grid. You don't actually see the point systems, the points that have been applied, but based on the points, you end up in a category. And then the pay for that category is based on a range. I'll just do, I think the next slide sort of explains some of the criteria. So you've got the role on the left. So what's the job? The last date that it was reviewed. So let's say a job has changed and you've updated the job description. The consultant will review that job description, confirm if it's the same points or needs to be adjusted, and then it comes back and gets replaced on the grid. The grid is broken up into a number of grades, which include a range of salary from 1 to 5. 5 is job rate. So when you get to 5, that's you're at the max. It means you've advanced your way up to performing the job to the best that you can from a qualifications and experience point of view. We also break it out because all of our admin staff, the majority of staff work under the 35-hour. However, our outside workers, our transportation team and our environmental services team work under a 40-hour work week. So you'll notice the grid has 2 different rates for that. So those are the components of our salary grid system. The report actually includes the entire, every job and where it fits under the grid. And I believe that's on the USB. If it's not, we'll make sure you have it. But it was in a report that went to council as part of the market check in 2021. Market check background. So quite typically, municipalities will go and have their salary grid system checked based on what other municipalities are doing. The municipality reviewed our internal pay equity, and external pay market. It was basically first done in 2007 using the job evaluation and the defined comparator group. Market checks were then completed in 2011, 2014, and then again in 2021. And that's the one I spoke to. That's the last one that we did. The 2021 updated assessment looked at the competitive market, the current pay policy percentile. A lot of times the municipality will say that we want to be in the X percentile of our comparative market group. We have always been at the 50th percentile. That was confirmed again in the 2021 market check. You're starting to hear some other communities that are getting concerned about recruitment and are starting to look at the 55th or 60th percentile of their comparator group. So that's just some of the things that they're doing to try to recruit. We confirmed in 2021 that we would stay at the 50th percentile. There are 14 comparators and they are based on a number of factors. These are a list of comparators that are used when we do it and have been used for some time. A lot of these are those people or those municipalities that we would be potentially losing staff to, or are of municipalities of a similar size to us that we can compare ourselves against. Some of the challenges we have is, especially when we get some of our unique jobs, you'll never find a comparator group that would have those similar jobs. The other important things about having comparators that we need to account for is to make sure that they have a number of similar jobs to ours when we do compare. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense to compare ourselves. So this is the list of comparators that we've been using for a number of years and was part of the 2021 market check. Yes, Rob.
So do you anticipate with labor force issues the way they are, and everybody's at five people, obviously, do you anticipate long term that 50 percentile will be sufficient, and that's what we anticipate staying?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I think, you know what, when we start, if someone, one of these comparators, and this is where it will really affect us. If one of these comparators is now at the 60, and I know Georgian Bluffs, I think they're 60th. So they're on one of our comparators. So if they're at the 60, you're going to see when we do a next market check, their salaries have gone up. And it's something for us to just be aware of and keep an eye on, I guess, as we go through. We'll look.
Think, Rob, if I can just add, because I just happen to have done quite a lot of recruitment over the last couple of months, we're getting more and more people who are asking us for the top of the range at the start. And we really try not to do that because obviously then they don't know everything about the municipality or their roles immediately, and there's no growth. And so in a year's time, people are unhappy because they don't get a step grade. And so, but yeah, we're really experiencing more and more people asking for the top of the grade and saying that they are taking pay cuts to come to us if they're making that decision. And we have lots of benefits that mean it's sometimes worth that, or because we're a good place to work, but that doesn't always cover the difference.
Right. We know even in market value, just the businesses in town, many of them are already reporting overpaying and to just get staff, period. So I don't presume that puts us in a special position if we have to go to that route. So I appreciate the difficulty.
If I may ask, and we've had this discussion, Rob, but I just wonder if you could just flesh it out a little bit for us, because it seemed to me anyway that at a time of high inflation such as we have now, that it might make more sense to offer a higher percentile base, and that might take the pressure off of demands for annual increases. And so, but you said, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of the other or something.
Yeah, I think they work together because as we go into the next slide, I think it is another component to our compensation system. Oh, sorry, I'll finish up and then I'll speak to the COLA component because it's also very important. Just some of the things, this should say 2021 market check recommendations. The reason why I say that was because the report was in December, but it was implemented in 2022. So these were recommendations for how we would implement it in 2022. So it actually is correct. That we adopt the salary framework that was in the report based on the 50th percentile. Plus the 1% economic adjustment. So we did 1% last year, 2022, we did the 1%. So the grid was adjusted based on the 50 for that. We also adopt a practice of undertaking a periodic market review of all positions on a 3 to 4 year cycle. You'll notice the last time there was quite a gap between, I think it was 2014 to 2021. It's just, there was quite a large gap in us doing that. And there was a number of reasons, but they say we should commit to that because the longer you wait, the bigger the adjustment and the harder the hit year over year it really becomes. So it's very important to do that more regularly. And then also look at annual increases to the salary grid. We've got to look at our comparative municipalities as well as what they're doing from for their COLA. as well as that, because it is correlates. Like if we come up to the 50, but then we're only doing the 1% and everybody else is doing 4%, that gap is widening as well. So we have to be aware of both things as we're going. I spoke of the issue of being cognizant of financial impacts. One of the things that council did is that do we implement this all on January 1 of this year, 2022? Or do we implement it in a phased in program such as when your anniversary date comes forward? So let's say you started in April or May, that's when you would get the increase move to the new grid. And that's how we implement it. So it assisted us financially with the budget last year. Everybody eventually got it through the year, but it just meant you didn't get it right at all. Everybody didn't get it all right at January 1 that we didn't make those adjustments. So that was one of the changes, and staff supported that. Again, finding that balance between maintaining that, but also considering the financial impact on the municipality.
Thanks, Rob. So the one thing I wonder is how the municipalities as a whole together, because it is, you're right, the benchmark between comparators between municipalities is apt to just and needs to be considered. When you look at mean averages of salaries within broad public sector, municipal sector is always considered to be, just that little higher level. So when you're doing these analysis, just wondering how the municipalities kind of, and it's not validate is not a good word, but to compare ourselves to public sector, and when you look at the mean average of like Grey County or Meaford, and where comparative jobs tend to be under scale, often wonder just how municipalities validate the differential, and that's not an easy question to answer. I know, but
yeah, it's I know in the past there has been some review, and part of the market check is identifying those positions that are market sensitive. And although you put it through a pay equity system and you end up with a certain grade, you're way under what everybody else is doing, and you're not going to be able to recruit it. So that is considered, I guess, as part of the evaluation a bit, but it is a significant challenge on evaluating that and how it fits it in, while at the same time maintaining pay equity. It's a challenge, and look to our HR manager to assist us in advising on that. Rob had a comment there. Yeah, sorry.
Your worship, oh, yes, buttons. That's a good point to bring up. It is like all things that we're seeing in terms of our competition with the market, right? Because we're not a business as such, but we're in the same business as many others. So I can speak for my department in terms of planning and building and municipal enforcement, particularly the first two. That there is such a shortage of skilled labor out there. In planning, we are hearing from consultants that we work with where people are, as they say, being poached from one company to another with cold calls. They phone an employee at the level they want and said, "Hi, how'd you like to work for us doing the same job, but with more money?" So there is a level of competition there, because we have to have that same standard of skill set, where the idea that the government job in that sector pays better or has better benefits and all that, that's a trope from a generation ago, quite frankly. It is not the case at all anymore, and that's one of the challenges we have. And I don't know how it is with other divisions. I imagine there's similar aspects there, but yeah, it's really tough all around.
so that's a very good point, because from a headhunting perspective, past professions, we experienced that greatly, where people were definitely trying to poach, and I'm going to assume there's not a great differential, there's not municipal respect. I won't kind of approach somebody else if There's not that level of respect in this industry either, I assume that. Or is there supposed to?
Well, we can't, our processes are different, right? We have to, like, I can't just phone someone up and say, I got a job to offer you. It's a process that gets publicly posted and all that, right? Companies, they can task someone in human resources to go find the people in whatever, as long as they're following the law, they can do it in whatever way they want. We have to publicly post it. And, you know, we don't have things like bonuses, and like there's all kinds of things that make it difficult to compete in that marketplace. It's gotten surprisingly weird over the past couple of years.
Thanks, Robin, through you, your worship. Just thinking about our benefit packages, and I know ours is good, I'm going to say top notch, but how much of a negotiating tool are the benefit packages? And are we sort of the same as everybody else in the comparator group, or do we offer anything different or more?
I know Matt wants, I'll let Matt, basically, we always say our benefits equate to an additional 17%. I think it's 17% that we, on top of the actual salary. I personally think that we're quite competitive when people see it, but Matt, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think we are competitive, but I think with a lot of other things, we're becoming less so over time. We haven't updated quite a number of portions of our benefits for now 4 or 5 years. And so, for instance, I believe it's $400 for a pair of glasses every 2 years now. And if any of you have gone and bought glasses recently, as I have, you're not getting a pair of glasses for $400 anymore. And so, you know, we see that across the board. For instance, our massage used to cover 100% of costs, but now the cost of an hour's massage is considerably more than the maximum the benefits provider will pay. So yes, we're competitive because I don't think anybody's really updating those benefit levels right now, because as soon as we update the benefit levels, the cost increases and everybody's really conscious of that. But it won't last forever, that what we're paying out in benefits is seen as being sort of top of market.
And part of the role of the HR manager position is to review our benefit package to make sure that we are staying competitive. That's part of their role. Hey, Brendan.
Thank you, Rob. Sorry, this might be a silly question, but in terms of maintaining competitiveness in the marketplace, how do we allocate those funds? Is that something that we would is that through tax increases, or is that through reallocating funds from within the budget? Like, what is the process if we're increasing salaries, how do we come up with those funds?
Yeah, it is budget. 100%. It's or you, in the case of water and sewer, user pay. So there's the payroll section. So as we're doing budget, which you'll see when we present the budget, actually when I get into COLA, that is done as part of the budget process. The market check changes were done just before budget last year. So we took it to council, explained the situation, council approved the phase-in program, and then we included that phase-in the budget. So as council saw the budget, at the end of last year, the beginning of this year, for this year's budget, it included those market check changes. So it's part of that process. Yeah. Really?
The deputy mayor asked part of my questions as far as the benefits are concerned. I'm assuming OMERS is universal.
Yeah.
There's no way you can enhance or take away from that. It's province wide, is it not? What's right for municipality A is the same as B and C.
That's correct. Yeah, OMERS. And actually, interesting thing that just happened this year, OMERS used to be only for full-time employees, but we were advised, they changed the legislation. We now have to offer it. It's not mandatory that they go in, but we have to offer it to full-time employees. So if part-time employees, if part-time employees wants to get into our OMERS, they can do that. And we have to contribute our share to that. So it was an increased cost to municipalities. So we had to go through that process through the last couple of months to confirm those individuals. Yeah, it's standard across the if a municipality is part of OMERS, which most are.
I understand even council members can get involved. It doesn't, well, it does come into our budget. It doesn't come into wages, salaries, benefits, but and it's kind of unfortunate because our municipality does have a very good after retirement benefits.
No. Yes. So that was a thing of the former town of Meaford employees way back when. That was a negotiation. They were the only ones that had, when you retire, there is no carry on of benefits.
Okay, but we will have a budget number for, and it's
For that.
considerable,
Yeah.
but anyway.
Yeah, sorry, just
that-
to clarify that one. Yes, we do. We have a post-retirement benefits for both former police officers and former municipal employees because we still have to pay benefits to the people that were under that scheme. And so these are people who retired before about 2005, who had lifetime benefits, or before, I think it was 2014, who'd worked for us for 15 years and retired before the age of 65, got benefits to 65. So we do have a budget for that every year, but it is going down every year because the number of people that are covered by it decreases, because there's nobody being added to it right now. But yeah, no employee gets benefits after retirement now when they're retiring.
Thanks for that, and if I may, just one more, your worship. It's all very well, and I'm sure all of our council members are, quite willing to keep up this 50th percentile or whatever. We have wonderful staff. But I just want to add that as a council member, as being representative of the public, we do have another side to consider here, and that it's not just quite as cut and dry as
Absolutely.
as what we read. Okay.
The last thing I had was related to the COLA. Council adopted a policy in 2021, and it's more just how we will start the budget policy and how we will deliver it. So quite typically, so when we look at last year, we started the budget with 1%, and then through that budget deliberations, council can move a motion that would be voted on to adjust that 1%. It didn't happen last year. We stayed at the 1%. The year before, there was an adjustment made. You'll notice on Monday, we'll have some discussion on it on Monday. I won't get into it now, but there was recognition that 1% maybe isn't a good starting point for this year because of inflation and that. So council will be dealing with the notice of motion on maybe providing a different starting number. That's all it is a number to start the budget for council then to deliberate and consider before you finalize the budget. So that's how we deal with the COLA. I will say that as a group of Grey County CIOs, we are working together and setting up an interactive spreadsheet that we can plug in where we are all at so we can see what each other's doing. I mentioned understanding what our comparator groups are doing. That's also very important as part of the consideration in doing that. So we will be able to provide that as we get into budget deliberations when we present the budget end of January into February. So council can understand that.
Thanks, Rob. To that point, I just kind of for public record, I mean, I think of everybody at this table has been in environments and small businesses where you go years, you don't get any increases. So we've seen years where OPP went years without getting any increases. So it's hard to validate to the public that it's a warranted automatic increase. Having said that, again, it's both sides of the coin. The reason I'm just putting a public record is because zero increases again don't help us moving forward, trying to get talent moving forward, because you have to meet equity with comparators. So it is very difficult, because you do hear people out there saying, and one of the thing is, well, why are you guys getting increases when I'm not getting anything in this economy and recession coming and et cetera. But for public record purposes, it is really difficult to maintain that and respect the fine tightrope walk it is to kind of maintain that balance of talent and increases.
Yeah, I think key, and this is how I was going to finish off the presentation. It's really a fully comprehensive system. Every's related. It's important to have a welcoming workplace as well. Like, it's not always about the money for people. It's also, they want to feel important. They want to feel like they can advance their careers and learn and that. So it's a very complex, and it's all interrelated, and it's us all working together as the board, as how I started off this presentation, and creating that environment as well, and doing so.
And your worship, if I may. So Rob, can you speak a little bit to opportunities for staff for advancement and for training and for moving up through the municipality, a chance to really grow their careers, and what impact that has on negotiations with people that are hired?
Yeah, so I spoke about performance reviews, and a big part of our performance review system now is about staff development. How can we work with you as a staff member to develop yourselves and advance through the corporation? We have tried to put as much money as we can, because obviously training and that costs money. So we try to have our training budgets at an amount that facilitates that. So we continually do that. A lot of times, if we have a really good candidate who's coming on that may be not quite there with their full qualifications, we'll build that into their recruitment, that we will assist them in getting their full qualifications. We've had to go do that a lot for our water operators. To get a fully qualified water operator, it has become was a real challenge. So we were recruiting what we would call operators in training, and then help fund them to get their fully qualifications to become full operators. The big thing we got to be, I know that I'll speak to the environmental services team. Their big concern was we'd bring them in, we'd train them, and then they'd move on to another municipality where they could make more money. So they were always highlighting that, but that was the only way we could get, and we have to have qualified operators to run our water system. If you only have a few, then those are the only ones working on weekends on our call, because they're the only ones qualified to do so. So that's an example of how we will work with recruitment and doing that. So. Okay, good. So I know the deputy mayor asked a question about our org chart. And really this is what this presentation is about. I didn't put the full org chart in the presentations again. I will send that out probably more so when we get it updated with the individuals to council. What's more important though than org structure, and that's really what I want to go through today, is what are the particular roles and tasks in each division? Like, what are they doing? I think that's probably the more important component that I want to highlight on today. So here's an example, high-level example of an org chart. So at the top, you can see we've got mayor and council. Under mayor and council, you have the CAO position, and this is really a reporting org chart. It's how the reporting occurs. Under the CAO, we have the manager of human resources. The clerk, director of community services, Matt, reporting to the CAO, director of development services, Rob White, director of operations, Jessica Wiley, director of engineering services, Tori, treasurer, director of financial services, Val, and then our manager of IT services, Mark Aiken. So that's that reporting structure. Unique over to the side, we have the library board, which has its own autonomous elements to it under the Libraries Act. They are to remain a separate board. The relationship to council is that you provide the funding for the library, but with regard to how they operate, they're basically, like I said, autonomous. We do have a very unique arrangement within the municipality of Meaford, where earlier this year, with the retirement of our CEO, we approached both council, because council had to agree, as well as the library board, to entering into a unique situation where, in addition to my role as CAO, I would also be appointed to the library CEO. That was done based on some unique circumstances in that we had a very qualified person who was the acting CEO at the time, but didn't want to be the long-term CEO, but was a very qualified individual to manage the day-to-day operations of the library, and that's Lynn Fascinato. So through discussions, we entered into an arrangement where I would assume the library CEO role in addition to the CAO. It is done in a few other communities, maybe not the CAO, but another position has a dual role. But very important to that, and it did come to council, was a service agreement to explain the very distinct relationship of when I'm acting as CEO and when I'm acting as CAO. And if there is any conflict that should ever arise, and there never has been, and hopefully there never will, but if there ever got into that situation, I would be stepping back from both roles. Matt would be assuming the role as CAO with regard to that particular matter in a related library, and that Lynn would assume the CE role as it relates to that. It's more just the fail-safe to ensure compliance with the Library Act. We hope it never happens, but we do have that agreement in place. And that did satisfy the library board in addressing compliance. It's interesting, at the last board meeting, I personally thanked the board. We had the mayor and Councillor Greenfield, who were on the library board. I personally thanked them for taking that step forward. I believe it's been better for the community as a whole. It provided additional resources to the library so that they could have staffing to open on Sundays and expand their service without any increased cost to the taxpayers. And thank them, and I believe strongly that they are very glad that board was very glad they made that decision as well, and didn't see any problems with it going forward. So, and then just back to the org chart, you can see a lot of the different roles and tasks. So I'll highlight as we go through. So Office of the CAO, sorry, Rob. Yeah.
Thanks, Rob. Sorry, just before you go on there, just looking at the org chart. So I know you're also trying to secure economic development individual.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering where that would fit on that org chart.
Yeah. As I go through the individual divisions and tasks, I can explain that. So yeah, that's good. So Office of the CAO, Library CEO, that's the dual role. So what's my role? I provide overall corporate leadership to the team. I'm also, it's not mentioned on here, but corporate leadership also includes the main liaison with council. As you know, I'm wanting to have regular meetings with councils individually to talk about things. I'll be as part of my review, we'll be having an in-depth discussion. So really, corporate leadership is a number of things. I oversee the manager of human resources, which includes the health and safety, and also IT services, as well as overseeing, as my role as CEO, the library services. So just a very brief, it's obviously a lot more than that, but that's just the brief highlights of what's that role is. Under community services, which is Matt's role, he oversees the cultural services team. It's actually, I got to say this every time when we were going through the HR managers, we introduce ourselves and explain our role, and Matt explains his role and says, yeah, you won't find this role anywhere else. Because again, one of the things that we found with the very small municipalities, and that's what you assume roles that are you need to fit in because you know that you can't have multiple people at their roles. So it's Matt has a very unique portfolio that you would not find anywhere else, I can tell you, in Ontario. Let's just put it that way. With cultural services, the museum in Meaford Hall, fire services. Matt is the clerk of the municipality, which is main role. So really a lot of the legislative services. So they all see the communication side, our new customer service team, council and committees, well-being, what we're doing in well-being, and then all records management. The clerk is responsible for the maintenance of the records, and we need to ensure that. Parks and facilities, so the parks, cemeteries, Harbor, Memorial Park, Arena, community centers, and building maintenance. So that's all falls under the manager of parks and facilities, Rod Willis, reporting to Matt. And then more as an oversight, but not really an involvement, the policing element, policing contract falls under the community services component. Ties into, we know that's sort of become part of well-being, and sort of, that's why it makes sense there. Development services side, so we have the planning and building component and municipal enforcement as the main one. And based on your question, Rob, economic development will now fall under that division. It's where, when I started, I was the director of development services, and economic development was under myself at the time, and then has moved around. But yeah, there's a big part of planning it includes economic development. If you read our official plan, which is a main plan, it includes so much about economic development, and there is that correlation. And I strongly support that it be integrated with that. Again, corporate leadership, I will be involved in elements of economic development as well. Engineering services. So this is Tori's leadership, under Tori's leadership. So she'll be overseeing our GIS. So that's geographic information systems, which is all of our and really, people always used to say GIS is your mapping. Well, really, it's a lot more than that. What it is, it's linking data to maps, so that when you click on a property, you're getting all the data with that property and ensuring that. I'm really happy with the advancements that we've made in GIS and where we can go with GIS. And it's just everybody in making a lot of our decisions and our recommendations, and having that robust GIS system. So GIS does that, and there'll be future training on what it really involved in the future. The project management office. So this is our two project managers that oversee all of the capital projects related to facilities, infrastructure. In addition, the project management, as the planners work on a planning application, there's this whole element, as we know, that is tied to engineering, such as the water and sewer, the roads, traffic, and all those aspects. They take that component and do the review and hire and work with our peer review engineering firm to coordinate that outside review. It was always previously done within the planning staff. We managed it, but it just, with the amount of planning it increased, it wasn't sustainable any. So we had set it up for the project management office to look after that. It also, when you move from review and an agreement, it also includes the construction supervision. We didn't have a lot of projects, so it wasn't a lot of work over the years, but as loon call kicks in and everything kicks in, there's going to be a lot more site supervision component to that. So the project management office will now be doing that. The asset management will be led by engineering because a lot of it is dealing with our assets, which are roads, water, sewer, core assets, and buildings. So there is that correlation between the two. One of the things that we'll be doing from an asset management point of view to ensure buy-in corporately with all staff is to make sure that it's a team approach to asset management. Under that, everybody will be working to ensure that we are meeting compliance, and it's not just create your plan and then put it on the shelf. It has to be a living document that needs to continue and inform council into the future. So we'll be moving, refocusing on that, as we know that we had an individual doing both IT and asset management, and it was just too much, and that got highlighted in the service delivery, which I'll speak to later. But yeah, we had to make that change. So asset management is going to live under here. We know climate change is very important. The county has done their plan, but now we need to look at what we need to be doing from a municipal perspective. So the engineering services division will be picking up the climate change county plan, looking at what we need to do. Asset management has to be viewed in a climate change lens. So we'll be, it makes sense to be there as well. Climate change will involve many people. It'll involve how we operate our facilities. It will involve how we deal with our operations and aspects. So it's very important that those two are done properly. Financial services, sorry. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, one just quick question there. So when you talk about GIS, is that tied in concert with the Grey County GIS public maps, or is that do we have our own captive?
Yeah, we used to just be relying on their system, but now we have our own internal system. But I would say that we do data sharing with them. So whatever data they have will be on ours and ours. So we do the zoning layer. We give it to them so that you can find it in both locations and it's active. So yeah, we work in concert, but we have our own system because there's a lot of stuff that we need to put on there that they don't care about. As we start building all of our intersection signs and from an asset management point of view and that as an example. So,
is it public? I've never actually looked at that. I always use the Grey County GIS.
Yeah, it is linkable, linked from our municipal website. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Financial services. So just to highlight some of the things that they look after, property taxes, utilities, the purchasing. So all of our purchasing coordinator to ensure that we're complying with the purchasing bylaw. Val has ultimate responsibility to ensure that make sure we're doing what we're supposed to be doing and not going astray. All accounts payable and receivable. The budgeting and accounting is a big part of which is led by financial services, and then also the payroll side. That was a recent move that we took it out of HR and moved it into accounting because payroll is basically just another element of accounts payable. So it made sense that they belong in the financial services division. And then operational services. So this is the operational side of our environmental services. So that includes the water, wastewater, and waste management. A lot of work in waste management right now with the changes coming down from the province, and you'll be getting some reports earlier in the new year on how we have to start looking at transition and agreements related to the recycling program. So, and that's Jessica's leading up this division. Transportation and fleet services. So they look at the operational side of our roads, fleet, leaf and yard waste, operating that. You heard on Monday that Jessica has become qualified as our drainage superintendent. More and more we are getting concerns about drainage, and a lot of times the Drainage Act is our tool to work with people in dealing with things. So to have Jessica lead that is we're very fortunate to assist in finding solutions for people to deal. We might not be able to always find a solution, but it's nice to have that knowledge and ability to bring forward under the Drainage Act. And then last and it sort of ties into climate change as well, is what we want to do with regard to forestry. We have so many trees in our community that require, quite constantly, we're getting expression of trees being taken down, and we want to make sure that they need to come down. So it's nice to have that qualified review of the forestry and really develop a more robust forestry system to maintain the trees in our community, which we know that many people value. So, yeah.
I don't know if anyone else has a question at this point, but if not, I just wonder about if I could ask Jessica about weather events. Have you observed, say over the last 24 months, any increase in severe weather, or especially with respect to rainfall, or is it still largely supposition in our part of the world? I don't know.
Through you, Madam Chair, I feel like it's not a secret that there have definitely been changes to how we're seeing weather in the last couple of years. Increased, I wouldn't even say the number of events, it's more the volume of events. I not so jokingly make comments sometimes about, is our 100-year storm still a 100-year storm, or is it something that we're seeing on, an annual or a few times a year basis? So I feel like we definitely have seen a lot of changes, and I think we're going to continue to see a lot of changes. So it's more, how are we going to be prepared for that in the future?
Thank you very much.
And if I can just expand on that, in interest, like to bring it to something that happened earlier this year. I was out on site with regard to the new long-term care home, and they had a water issue in their building, and they were trying to find out what happened. And I said, so here's the first thing that happened that should identify that this was an unusual event, that we in the morning got a warning from John Bittorf at the Conservation Authority that we are going to see a significant amount of rainfall in a very short period. There will be flooding that you've never seen before.
Not to interrupt, but that's a great point, and it's important for everyone to know that we do have a really great relationship with John at the Conservation Authority, and he does his best to always provide us those updates, albeit he might only get them himself from, like 15-20 minutes in advance, but he is very good about disseminating the information so we can do our best to be as prepared as we can be. But I am very grateful for that relationship that we have with him.
So that's it for the sort of the operations side. You heard Matt speak on Monday about delegated authority. And we have a delegated authority bylaw number 40-2014. He spoke of it's under the act that it's allowed, 23.1 and 271, let me back. That requires us to adopt policies, how we implement it. So it is fairly dated. At the end slide, I'll sort of highlight the end. We have attempted to update it, but it's such a massive job to update this. As you go, if you went through it, you'll notice there's reference to jobs that have been replaced by a different title. And so when we do go through this, we want to make sure they're not title based. They might be role based and things like that as we potentially update it. But why do we do this? I think is key is, and for me, it's to enable timely implementation of a council approved bylaws. So there's certain things that come to us that are so routine, they're in accordance with council's policies or in accordance with the approved budget. And it really allows us to ensure, I would say, effective government by not say I have to wait to a two-time council meeting to get approval. As you see some of the items in there, you'll say, oh yeah, that makes sense, that it just continue on and do that. We also need to make adjustments as well as we go through this with regard to changes in legislation. We know that additional things are now required to be delegated to staffs, particularly on the planning side, because Bill 109. So we might want to I guess it doesn't even need to be in the delegated authority bylaw, but it'd be nice to have a concise list of those things. So bylaw 40/2014 is included on the USB stick that was provided to you. So if you want to read through that full list, it is there. I am going to take you through some of the highlights of the positions that are there. So under the CAO, it sort of identifies the general responsibilities, noting that the CAO is the senior official, exercising general control and management of affairs of municipality, and for the purpose of ensuring efficient and effective operation of the municipality and delivery service and providing organized leadership to staff. So that's basically highlights the rationale for this to ensure that we are continuing with good governance. It speaks to things such as the CAO shall have access to all records. It allows me to deal with requests for leave of absences, should it be required. Any organizational changes subject to a number of criteria, such I can't do a reorganization change that's going to result in hiring 10 new people without it going through the proper budgeting process. So there's those conditions that are applicable to organizational change. I thought those top three were very important, so I reiterated them at the beginning for some reason. Can use a bit of a proofread, but next thing is litigation and counsel. So as we potentially get litigated, I have authority to go out and recruit that legal counsel that I feel is necessary to defend any position or retained legal counsel for a matter that we need legal input on. It also allows me to approve sponsorships up to a certain level. So someone comes to us and say, I want to do something. We know we have budget under another item. It allows some minor sponsorships outside our normal sponsorship program for that. Treasurer, a lot of the treasurer's duties come back to those duties that they're allowed to under the Municipal Act. Some of the examples are transferring funds. So if someone has a budget and a budget item that they know they're not going to, as example, let's say I have a training budget that they couldn't get to training and there's going to be a little surplus in the training, but they need a little bit extra money for something that might be going in another item. They're allowed to transfer within the treasurer will transfer funds from one account to the other. It's not increasing the budget. It's just moving it from one account to the other to allow those tweaks in operations, as well as if one capital project is going to go over, but another's going to be under, it allows just moving from, but staying within the system. So it allows the treasurer to do that. It allows the treasurer to deal with cash in lieu of parkland payments. Debt, it allows them to manage, but a lot of times the bigger debt requires a bylaw to come to council. I'd need Val to explain what her limitations a bit on the debt side, but larger debt definitely has to come because agreements have to be signed with the agency. Tax arrear agreements. So if someone gets into arrears but is going to enter into a repayment program, it allows Val to enter into those type of agreements with people. Tile drain loans, just working through them. Okay, good to highlight. Yeah, there's, like I said, there's a number of changes we do have to make. It's property assessment proceedings. So allows her, if we're concerned about the assessment on a property, it allows her to proceed with someone to appeal that assessment. Charitable rebates. So if we get a donation, it allows her to write a charitable receipt for that donation, and also to do various write-offs. Repayment agreements, the tax certificates, issue tax certificates. So property sells, we get a lot of times requests for a tax certificate on the outstanding taxes where the taxes sit, so that they can ensure that with the property transfer that who's ever assuming the property knows that they're not going to be stuck with a big property tax bill. So we do tax certificates, so ensure lawyers can issue that, to do all the water and sewer billing, and also to deal with levels of insurance. Under the clerk, director of legislative services, allows us to settle some minor claims. Any major claims would have to come through council, but anything that's minor that we feel we can settle, such as something happened to someone's car and it was truly our fault, then we can set, and it's minor in nature, we can he has the ability to do that. Contract approval. So this is when council authorizes through the budget a project, but it requires actually a legal agreement on how it's going to be implemented. The clerk has the ability to sign those contracts. You heard that the clerk is the designated head of the Municipal Freedom of Information. So anybody submits a request, he is the one responsible for processing those and making decisions on whether stuff can be released or not. M&R work permits. So someone wants to do work on the shore. We get a request. They submit it to us because we have to sign off on it. It's just work on the shore. A lot of times it really doesn't affect us, but we need to sign off that we're aware of it. So they're allowed to do that. Registration of agreements related to a parent agreement approved by council. So a lot of times, and this was more of a planning matter. So we do a subdivision agreement that then will require a bunch of other legal documents to be signed to implement that agreement, such as land transfers or easements or other aspects. And so it allows them to sign those, what I would call sub documents to the main documents that was already gone through council, and council is aware of that they have to be implemented. Recreational land. So this is any agreements with regard to rental agreements, allows the director of community services, not so much his role as clerk, but more as the director of community services to do that as it relates to someone who's wanting to rent. So all of Meaford Hall agreements, contracts with individuals. So this allows the authority for that to be done. And then adjust hours of operations for facilities. This is done a lot of times in emergency situations to deal with whether we don't have staffing or whether we have to close because of weather, and it allows those to be done for those type of facilities. Director of operations, any maintenance and liability agreements, signs and traffic. These are all routine stuff that typically wouldn't come to council anyways. Deal with signs and traffic signals, authority to put those up. Implement temporary traffic and parking controls. So example, we just had it, Santa Claus parade. Roads need to be closed. Detours need to be done, signs need to be put up, parking needs to be limited. They have authority to deal with that on a temporary basis. Any utility contracts, sewer discharge agreements. This is more stuff related to the environmental services. If they have to enter into an agreement to have sewer trucked away, they're allowed to do that. And that's compliance certificates, and then hauling waste. So those are all related to environmental services components. Over to director planning. So site plan approval. This under the current 2014 bylaw allowed the director to issue site plan approval where no site plan agreement was required. So it was all minor site plan approvals. We now know under Bill 109 that the director is now responsible for all site plan approvals, that the director shall be allowed to issue site plan approval for all. So we now know this is adjustment, but when this was put in, it was for minor. Niagara Escarpment development control permits. We get the planning staff get these regularly. We provide comments to the Niagara Escarpment. Comments go to the Niagara Escarpment. Generally, they're very routine. If they would otherwise comply with zoning or zoning in place, they would just issue a letter. If it's for a use that would normally require rezoning or that, then a report would come to council for that in a similar fashion. Letter of credit reductions. So that's under an agreement. Developer puts up money to ensure things are done. When they're done, they're signed off by our, typically done by our engineer. of our peer review engineer, he says, yep, they're done. I agree with them. Then we're allowed to reduce those letters of credit or release them under this process. Certificate of title application. So if a property is going to be developed, they certify the boundary of the property. It's a very technical exercise, and the director's allowed to do that. Pre-servicing agreements. So council's approved a development in concept. They want to get in and start putting roads and water and sewer in. They're allowed to do that because they're doing it at their risk. We have securities to restore the property. There's no commitment on allocation at that time. There's no commitment to those other things that council should be, such as the amount of cash in lieu of parkland and things that need to come. So that is done at staff. Providing clearances to draft plan approval. So again, that's a very technical exercise where they've met all the conditions of draft plan approval, which is mostly usually on our side, entered into a subdivision agreement which council approved. So it's just writing the county to do that. There is the ability for staff to issue draft plan approval support letters of extension, but only for a limited period of time. You'll know, as we are constantly getting those Meaford Haven ones, they went well beyond that time that staff could do it. And I think we're allowed to do one extension at staff level. And then after that, it has to come to council for support. Issue of sign permits. That's really council's created the bylaw. If it complies, we can issue permits. Variances need to come to council. And then any building code matters are over to the CBO. Schedule B under the bylaw, just so you're aware of it, is those restricted acts after nomination day. Basically, this is our lame duck provisions that are also in the bylaw. It probably need to be updated. Many items are reported annually. So a lot of times in the bylaw, you'll see staff shall report annually on these actions so that council is aware of all those actions that we're taking a lot of times under certain aspects of the bylaw. And then as I would continue saying, staff have identified the need for a major update to that bylaw. So that's the end of that presentation. There is coffee.
It could be in order for sure. Okay, are we ready to resume?
So the next session we're going to be doing is just a bit on talking about policies versus operations. And what I tend to do there is just go through some of our both plans, policies, show you a bit that how they operate, and then basically move into how we operationalize them. I'm going to explain, you've heard a bit about these departmental plans, and I'm going to explain a bit about those within this presentations, which you will see within the budget process when they come forward. So so basically, both strategies and plans, we'll start with those. They are adopted by council. Most of the time, when they come forward to council, you'll be seeing them adopted as guiding documents to guide our future work plans, to guide how we would like to proceed. That's how we have treated them. They're not so stringent that says next year we are going to be doing this and the year after we're going to be doing that. It's sort of just a guide as we develop our priorities and our work plan. So that's the basis for these. There are some exceptions, and I will say as a former planner, the official plan is a lot more than just a guiding document, because those things that we do shall comply with the official plan. So it's how we evaluate planning applications. But under the Municipal Act, there's a section of the Municipal Act that says any work undertaken by the municipality shall comply with your official plan. So it does have that provision as well, that it's not just a planning document, how we planning applications, but so we it also guides our work in ensuring compliance. And then we will develop our work plans and budgets around these various strategies and plans. I've gone through and highlighted some of those that are there. They're all on the USB that has been provided to council. And as things get updated, we will provide them to you. So the former council strategic priorities from the previous term of council from 2019 to 2022, I'll be bringing a report to council in January outlining a proposed process to update that strategic plan. There's the communication strategy that was developed a couple of years ago, the economic development strategic plan, which basically a lot of the action items from that plan got built into the growing our economy under the council strategic priorities. The well-being plan, quite a few years ago, we did a rec and culture strategic plan. Probably, I know that we're looking, maybe not some, and on the culture side, we've gone off and done our own Meaford Hall, or sorry, museum strategic plan. We're working on the Meaford Hall strategic plan, but we need to look at the recreation side and update that a bit. We have our asset management plan for core assets. We have our transportation master plan, which was adopted last year. The master servicing plan, which guides what servicing we need to upgrade in relation to growth, and that will feed into our development charges bylaw. The museum strategic plan, which I spoke of a few years ago. Actually, we've done 2 fire master plans since I've been here. One that was done a couple of years ago. Our multi-year accessibility plan, which you heard about under our accessibilities. The energy conservation and demand management plan. This was we were required to do this through legislation. The waterfront strategy and master plan that was done in 2014. We did that plan. There was 2 components to that plan. One component of that plan was to update our official plan with regard to policies, which we did in 2014. So we did implement that. It spoke of future design elements to improve the harbor area, and we've been working on that plan. We had some property matters that we need to consider first before we advance to the plan, but that will be continuing on next year. So the next phase of implementation of that plan. The official plan. So right now, our current approved official plan is the one that was done probably 4 years ago. the official plan that was just adopted at the last meeting of the previous council. It's been adopted and has been sent to the county. The county is the approval authority, so we have to wait till the county approves it. They could make tweaks to it before it's approved. We will provide you that adopted plan so you can have it though. But just keeping in mind, it's not technically approved until it goes through that approval process with the county. The Heritage Conservation District Plan, we know we're embarking on a process to update that plan, which was done using. And then we have our various parks plans to guide how we want to develop those. So we talk about Legion Park, the Center Street Landfill Park, we have McCarroll Park,
St. Vincent Park.
St. Vincent Park plan. Yeah, I knew there was a fourth. I was trying to remember what the fourth one was. So yeah. And then we have plans to do, I know, the Leith and Peter Cameron and things like that.
Rob, if you don't mind, I think this is a spot where surely there are some questions you'd like to ask about these various plans. And particularly our new members of council. And if you need just a thought starter, I would inform you that, and I said this at the time, I just want to point out our museum strategic plan is basically a life support plan. You know what I mean? It's you know, how to keep it alive and breathing until we can come to grips with you know, the fact that we can't afford it, I suppose, is one way to put it. So I think that we could spend a lot of time on this, but if anybody has any questions about these various plans, I think that's where a lot of my questions reside, is about these plans. I just don't know enough about a lot of them, even though I've been on council for 4 years. So
yeah, I think the intent of this session was just to highlight what is a plan.
Yeah,
I think as certain divisions we get into training in the new year with certain divisions, you're going to hear more and more about those plans as it relates to. So when the cultural team starts delivering, Krista starts delivering their training on the cultural side and things like that, they'll get into more deep on those individual plans. But if you have some high level, absolutely talks to those.
and now that we have them on a memory stick, I mean, I would suggest bedtime reading, you know, one report before you go to bed every night for the next, you know, 8 weeks. 6 years. Thank you, Rob.
Yeah, some of them are pretty complicated. The master servicing plan, I think, is one that's very technical, very, but very necessary, because we need to know what we need for growth, and it is out of date. It needs to be looked at, maybe not in totality, like maybe when we did those plans, as I spoke to the recreation culture, you know, maybe one side's gone off in one direction and we need to do another component for half of it, and so break it out. So we'll be looking at staff and as part of our work plans, looking at how we deal with those on the go forward. Yeah.
The waterfront strategy and master plan, is that's not the harbor master plan, is it? Or is the harbor master plan incorporated into that, or is it still a separate entity?
You know what, it included, it recognized the harbor. I think more important in the harbor is probably the business plan, I think, that we want to do.
Yeah, I think the design work that's going on right now at the harbour is part of the waterfront master plan. Yeah. It's one of the sections of it. So yeah, it is the same thing. I think we've started to call it the harbour master plan in many respects because an awful lot of our waterfront that it considers is the harbour. I think did it split into 8 sections, and the harbour takes up 4 or 5 of those sections, and then Bayfield Street and David Johnson and things like that as well. So yeah, they are the same thing.
Well, to that point, that's interesting then, because when you look at the waterfront strategy plan, and then there's the economic development strategic plan and the recreation culture strategic plan, because in the recreation culture strategic plan, when I was reading that, it covered off some of that because those are all kind of intermingled. So there must be a lot of cross-pollination between a number of these. And I'm just wondering, is it necessary to split them out, or has it just become too much to kind of combine them into one entity?
Yeah. As I said, I think as we go forward, we're going to more appropriately link them where they belong. So sometimes they were too big. And
I think the other thing, and we kind of mentioned it about the road master plan last time around, is that we recognise that for very few of the plans is every action item in them a sensible action item as things change, or as we become realistic about the finances that we've got available, or people's desires change and so on. And so, yeah, I think we are doing some work on the waterfront master plan right now, and when that comes to council, that's going to have a pretty hefty price tag on it. And so there'll have to be a conversation of, is this still a plan that we really want to be moving forward with, or do we want to adapt it in some way? And then, yes, how does it fit in with recreation needs and all of those sorts of things? So I think, yeah, they've got to be linked together, and partly that's why Rob's showing you this list, and we've put them all in one place for you so that you can get them there, because we do have to start, and I mentioned this about facilities last week as well. We've got to start looking at the big picture rather than we'll do this and then we'll do this and then we'll do this, because by the time you then get to the fourth this, you can't do that because you've caused a problem somewhere else along the line.
If I can just add a point, and it may seem obvious, but it's actually easy for us to forget because of all the different business lines, if you will, that we have as municipal government. With these plans, the plan doesn't mean the work is done. The plan is the work program to get done. The plan of any of these is the end of the beginning. That's when the real work starts, right? So let's just take the waterfront plan, for example. The plan's done. Has the waterfront has it changed yet? No, because we haven't done the work that it dictates for us to do. And these things aren't usually just a simple action item, right? Because then it would just be a project. These are plans that have multiple projects in them, and there's incremental change and growth and development and all that happens there. So any one of these, you can pick whichever one, crosses multiple budget cycles and has a whole sequence of projects within it that need to be done, and they need to be done in a certain order. You can't just jump straight to the end of the book and see how does the story end. You need to go through every chapter, if you will, and get to that. And unfortunately, that is one of the difficult things that many municipal governments find themselves in, right? They keep doing these plans, and we can't get through the cycles of multiple budgets, in many cases, multiple sittings of different councils to get the final resolution of these, right? So these are all big work items that we need to figure out.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because the distinct difference between a project and a plan is just that. I mean, technically, these will never end, because as you finish it, it evolves into something else as the demographics change, as the municipality changes. So yeah, the fine line of these encompass a number of projects, I assume, but the plan just on goes. So, okay.
Good. I'll now move over to policies. So a policy is, as it notes on the slide, a defined corporate direction. They are approved by council, adopted by council through bylaw. All the policies have that bylaw, again, for records management, so that we can make sure that we're tracking them. If they're not, that sometimes they're hard to follow. And I know that when Matt came on board, there was policies that were never approved by council, so we had to go back and source those out, and we've updated that and have brought them forward. So it's great for record tracking. They provide a framework, again, for ensure that our decision making is consistent, and also, I would say, fair across the organization. So as we say, this is how we're going to apply things. It's how we're going to apply it fairly for everyone. So those policies are very important for us in guiding how we as staff implement those various policies. The supporting legislation for such policies is the Municipal Act, but Municipal Act allows council to develop various policies, and it specifically provides council the authority to develop and evaluate the policies and programs. So that's just a bit of an overview of what a policy is. Highlighting, get there in the middle, highlighting some of our policies. I spoke this morning about our human resources policy. It was done quite some time ago, as we've tried to adapt to a number of things, such as creating a COVID was a big thing for us. We had to look at our HR policies, which some and implement them to be more adaptable for assisting. So work at home elements were updated in the human resources policy to deal with that, setting the rules in place, and that legislation changed with regard to various aspects that we know that I'm just trying to think of a few that might have been done over the years, can't offhand, but we've had to update it in relation to that. And then also just ensuring best practices. So those get updated. As I noted, the policy was approved by council long time ago. I don't Harley might have been the only one on council when that was done. But the authority to update those subject to no major change rests with the CAO. I spoke about the CAO performance review policy. There's actually a policy that guides how that's done. So council set that policy and then we follow how it's done. You've heard about the council code of conduct policy, the advisory committee and volunteer code of conduct. So there's also a code of conduct for them. There's a policy that speaks on how we will act in accountability and transparency to ensure that we're operating in open government. The cannabis retail store policy. So the government said you can't pass bylaws to regulate it, but you could create policies. So we have established policies on how we would comment to the provincial government on someone wanting to locate a cannabis retail store. And basically our policy says is we won't support them if they're in X amount of meters from a church, a school, the library, Meaford Hall, so those community facilities, so they're required to be separated from those actual buildings. So I know there was a request for one right across from the office. We advise that they're in close proximity to church, so our comments to the government would be it's not in accordance with our policy, and then it never proceeded based on them understanding what our policy was. So that's how we are able to deal with trying to control those to some degree. The commercial patio on municipal land policy, that was just a very recent policy that was approved by council as it relates to all the rules in place on how commercial patios could be done. We previously had a pilot program that became very useful when COVID hit, and we're able to utilize that, but then we've changed it over to a permanent policy to allow them. Council staff relations policy, which I spoke to about under the HR earlier. We have a flag and water tower light policy. So requests, there's a process in place, how long flags get flown at request, lights, the water tower, when we change the lights, how all those, and when we do it. The land acknowledgement policy, we do it, the reading and when we do it, this sort of identifies when we will do it. Municipal debt management policy, so when we will incur debt. Our purchasing policy, I spoke earlier about the role of the finance department and they ensure compliance with those policies and rules. Now we do that. The roadside vegetation management policy, that was one that came a few years ago when there was expressed concern about our brush clearing along the side of the road. So we established a policy that speaks about how we communicate in advance to the public when we're doing it and how we do it. The street, park, and facility naming policy. So someone wants something named, a new subdivision comes and they want to name the streets in it. We have criteria on those, on how that happens. The tangible capital asset policy. So under asset management, we had to develop that policy. It was done a few years ago. And then our tree canopy policy that was done a number of years ago as well. So those are just some of the policies that are in place. A little different than a plan. A policy is guides us on our operational side, which is different from a plan, which is guides us on how we develop our work plans and budget. So just understand the difference between the two. I'm going to speak a little more in detail about council strategic priorities and the document. I've been personally through this a number of times over my career. It's typically either a new strategic priority document is done at the start of a council or early in the early stages of council, or they look at the previous one and just, if there's not a large changeover and they like it, then really you're just updating it. It's set by council to guide the priorities. That's how really council speaks about what your priorities really are for the next term. It's usually completed the first year, as I mentioned. It includes your mission, vision, values, the strategic focus, goals, and we will, one of the things that we sort of elaborated on is that they be the SMART goals. They're attainable, they're very understandable, and we'll speak to that. So right now, I don't know if you've read it yet, but this is the current vision, mission, and values of that was set by the previous council. Actually, I think it was the previous council, and we just very similar. We just updated it a bit with some of our action items. So the place to be on Southern Georgian Bay with the mission, and then the values. I think a lot of times, if you read many communities, respect, integrity, and community, you find most communities have those as their values because it reflects our role as municipal government. Okay. I will be bringing a report in January that will outline a process on how we intend to look at updating the official plan and set our priority goals for falling out of the 2019. So it's going to look at, here's the old goals, here's what we've achieved, here's what we haven't, and then sort of set a process of consultation with council on how we intend to look at that. It'll ask confirmation of those mission, vision, values. Is there anything else you would like to see changed on that? Confirmation of the pillars, those pillars that we've established, such as growing our economy, investing in infrastructure. Also look at all the priorities and start to get some feedback from you. Following that, our intent is to have a workshop with yourselves and senior staff to weed through those and talk about what are the priorities of council should be. And then an updated plan will be brought back to council for approval. So that's sort of what we're looking at, but I'll have a more in-depth report coming in January to set the time frame for all that.
If I may, I just add to that. When we get to that discussion, that would be a great time to have some thoughts on some of the plans that, as Mr. Voigt has pointed out, have been on the shelf long enough that we've kind of lost track of them, but are actually, the steps that we would need to take to actually affect some changes, on the harbor or in various other, plans that are there. Thank you.
So moving over to operations, it is really the responsibility of staff to operationalize those various policies that have been approved by council. So it basically guides us on how we do our day-to-day work for the most part. There's policies, but there's also our professional experience on how we would do that. A lot of times staff will develop procedures, standard operating procedures. Example, there's some divisions that have extensive procedures because they're required. We have an operational plan for our water and water plant because it's required under DQMS, but it really tells, it ensures compliance with that legislation that we're operating at. And that's the greatest example. That it's quite extensive procedures. We do have some other examples of procedures. We have an accounts payable procedure, so talks about how accounts payable gets done. So who signs it, who can sign, what limits you can assign approving accounts payable, and then how the treasurer is involved in it. So it's a very detailed procedure on how we perform our role and responsibility. There's a special transit booking system that I think Margaret oversees. So it tells how people can qualify, how people can book through that system and the rules and who does the review. So it sort of outlines how we implement that. The corporate check issuance, the bring your own device. Our two new council members have decided to go with the BYOD, bring your own device, meaning that they're going to be using their own cell phones. So we have an agreement with them that helps compensate them in addition to their own plan, as opposed to carrying 2 phones. That's also available to number staff. So it just outlines the rules for doing that. So we had basically a procedure for that. I think that we need to do a number of other procedures going forward. Another one, sometimes we have to have a procedure as it relates to some legislative requirements. And one of the ones I can think of, we just recently had to do legislative, is an electronic monitoring. So we had to let staff know from a procedure point of view how they could potentially be monitored electronically. And that, so we had to identify that. So that was just a recent procedure, and that was required from a legislation point of view. Wanted to sort of speak about service delivery review. Just heard in the news this week that the town of Blue Mountains is going to be undertaking their first service delivery review. I don't recall one being when I was there, but I thought they might have done one. I know they've done departmental reviews, specifically on the development side and planning side, but this is going to be their first overall corporate service delivery review. The municipality, actually, there was one done in 2010 when I first came that was a citizen-led one. The 2015 to 2017 service delivery review was all staff-led. Where we brought reports over a 2.5-year period on various aspects of operations and looked at ways of being more efficient and effective. It also included presenting some options to council about different things if you wanted to proceed with it. And some of the ones that were talked about that some would say they're really not a service, they're maybe operational, but one of the things that came forward was charging for downtown parking. If staff presented that option, council said, no, we don't want to do with that. So it didn't proceed. There were some operational matters that did occur. At that time, all of our IT services were done by an outside company. We were seeing significant challenges from a leadership point of view in doing that. So under that process, we brought that back in-house and hired our first IT person at that time under that process. Another one was, at the time, we had Aqua, the Ontario Clean Water Agency, operating our sewage plant. And then we had our own environmental services division doing the water plant, water distribution, and wastewater collection. So we were doing 3 out of the 4 elements of the environmental services. We brought an extensive report to council with financial analysts that recommended that it would be more efficient for us to be doing it all. And council agreed with that and brought that back in-house. And I'm very glad that we did. And I still would stand today and say that that was a really good decision that we made on behalf. So that was just some of the stuff that was included in that service delivery review. In 2022, the municipality retained KPMG to undertake a bit of a review, a service review. It was more looked at efficiencies. It didn't look at is there do you need this amount of people to do that amount of job? It wasn't intended, or to look at the services we were providing and whether we should be providing it. We felt that so much effort was given to that 2015 to 2017 of what services we provided, and it was an extensive process. Took a lot of time, great commitment. Council really appreciated understanding the services through that process, that we didn't want to have that reevaluated. But what were the options to do that? And there was coming out of that study, it identified a number of efficiencies. It did identify a top 5 priorities, which I'm going to go through. I will identify one of the key concerns of staff is with those recommendations is recommendations are great, but it requires staff resources to implement those, even if they result in efficiencies. And we just identified that that is a concern. However, as we develop our work plans, departmental work plans, they will be factored in as we go forward. So the top 5 priorities out of that report came to council last year and was identified it. One of the things is that we need to really improve our key performance indicators, our KPIs. One of the things is when you start looking at, do you have enough staff to deliver that service is understanding what those indicators are to be able to evaluate that. So one of the recommendations is that we potentially can look at, we should be looking at developing on how we track those, our performance. Some of the other things that came out of there was implementing a structure. The key to addressing a variety of opportunities to develop an implementation plan. So as we look at all of the recommendations, they said we should be looking at these 5 items as we do. So implement a structure which includes how to lead on those opportunities. Develop a roadmap on how we will proceed with a lot of these items in the service delivery review. Implement a scorecard, as I talked about the KPIs. Develop a change management framework. A lot of times as we look to do things in a different way, we have to develop a roadmap on how we're going to bring people along on that. A lot of times on staff, on how we're going to bring them along with that change. And then the last thing is how develop a communication strategy around those changes. Because as we change on how we're going to do things, potentially we need to ensure that the public is aware of how that changed and how it doesn't create angst in the community on change. We typically do change because we believe change is good, and it's basically in communicating to the public on that aspect. So those are some of the key findings that came out of the service delivery review on how we work through that. So the 2023 budget process will include departmental work plans. You've heard us talk about this as we come forward. We've been trying to find a way to advise council, and we've been trying to do it for the last 3 to 4 years, of everything we're working on. There's a lot of stuff that staff have as our priorities that are operational stuff that really have nothing to do with council, that we believe you should be aware of as they relate to your priorities, so that you can see the big picture. We've been talking about the big picture, understand. So we've developed this hopefully process. It's sort of the first kick at it. We'll take it through this year, and hopefully it works to develop these work plans, and it's again to provide a comprehensive look and hopefully assist you in developing some of your priorities. So you're going to be getting that as part of the budget, and then following that we'll be into council strategic priorities. So you'll be able to have that big picture. Just a bit of the layout of those work plans. It's going to give an overview of the division that the work plan is being delivered by. So back to those divisions that I spoke to earlier, there's going to be one of these for each of the divisions. It's going to explain the departmental structure, those services provided. It's going to speak, the first part of it is going to be corporate priorities. Right now, it's going to be building on those unfinished priorities, really, that council's established corporately through the old strategic plan at this point in time. We know that the economic development strategy is very new, built in there. We haven't got very far. So we'll be just bringing those forward as council priorities. When I speak about leading and contributing, so one division might be leading it, but another division might be contributing to that strategy. So we'll identify those priorities that cross over between different divisions. And then we'll talk about departmental priorities, and those are the things that we as staff want to do really bad. And these are the ones that we believe either we will attempt to lead over the next year, or potentially be supporting another division in doing that. And one of the ones that would potentially be in here, I'm just trying to think of a departmental priority that could be an example that really isn't falling out of council's priority. I'll take the delegation of votes, but I don't. There you go. Council might not be concerned, but we know that can make us more efficient. So we will lead that. It might not end up on council strategic priorities, but it might be our departmental priorities. So that's a good one. We'll highlight some of our departmental challenges that we're having. Also, it's always to celebrate some of our main accomplishments. Those department, what have they accomplished over the last little bit? So we'll be highlighting that. And then we'll include an appendix. And this is the wow, we wish we really could do this, but we know that we just don't have capacity to do it. So you're going to see a whole list. And what, as we go through this priority, what council could do is say, you know what, on that appendix list, that's a real priority of mine. I think that should be bumped up, and then we'll talk about what we can't do, and it would be bumped down to the appendix. So we can have that comprehensive list of stuff for us to do. So I really look forward to, as part of that process, it'll be part of the 2, potentially 3-day budget process. So it'll be part, as we deliver the budgets, part of those departmental deliver the budgets as we go through that process. So, yeah. The last thing I'll speak to is the cabinet collective responsibility. And this is really, I looked up what that really means, the technical term, and it's known as the collective ministerial responsibility in a constitutional convention, in a parliamentary system, which we are part of. And basically, in basic terms, it's once a decision's made by government, so once a decision is made by council, it is the position of this municipality, and we need to abide by it. That's council, but also staff. Like, we can't, as staff, be saying, well, we don't like that decision, we're not going to be implementing. Once council directs us, we as staff will be implementing that. But collectively as council, that is the position of council, and we need to be working with regard to that decision. So it's just highlighting that component, and it's applicable to everyone. Both, we are a team, council and staff, in implementing those decisions of council. Okay, good.
Thank you, Rob. Thank you very much.
So as I noted, Val and I are going to do a bit of a tag team on this one. I'm going to deal with a lot of stuff around the creation of the budget and how we deliver the budget, and Val's going to be talking about all the technical stuff related to reserves and all that fun stuff. So the first slide. Okay, sorry. There we go. So this is just a very high level, what is a municipal budget? Basically, it speaks to how the dollars will be used, invested, or how we intend to earn dollars. So we have a few more resources than just tax dollars. We have user fees, so building permits, planning applications, people paying stuff in addition to our general dollars. So it just speaks about how we intend to use those funds over the given period. Incorporates planning, coordination, and control features throughout the year. So when we intend to implement things, it is the single most important document and decision-making exercise undertaken by a municipal annually. Basically, it guides what we intend to do this year, because if it's not in the budget, then and it requires funds, we can't be doing it unless it becomes an emergency. We have to come back to council and get special permission. It's necessary to set our tax rates, the water and wastewater rates, and establish fees and charges. I think a big example is if council doesn't want to charge a particular fee for a particular item, and I'll use an example, bag tags. If we don't want to charge for bag tags, okay, so there's a lack of revenue. The costs are still there so we're going to have to increase the taxes to offset for that loss on the fees and charges. Budget establishes current and capital expenditures, so those we intend to proceed with. And I think it may be better explained by the municipal finance officers who have provided this video that I find very informative. So I'll go to the next one and next one, right? Okay. Oh, just a bit on this. So you'll notice that there's the Meaford logos on this. This is on our website. So this is available to the general public who wants to see how your municipal budget works. So this is available to everyone. It was personalized with our logo and everything, but it is based on the Municipal Finance Officers Association presentation.
Okay.
Okay, I would like to help you understand how your municipality develops its budget. We always hear about them, and often this can feel like another language altogether. Before we get started, there's important information you should know. Ontario municipalities like Meaford receive only 9% of all taxes collected, but are responsible for over 50% of the infrastructure. Let's start by looking at what the word budget means. Simply put, it is a planned, itemized summary of money that is coming into the municipality and how that money is spent for a specific period of time. It is very important to note that provincial government legislation in Ontario states money coming in equals money going out, also known as revenue equals expenditures or a balanced budget. The municipality of Meaford provides more than 45 services to the residents of Meaford. So council and administration always have to make difficult decisions to ensure this balancing takes place. There are two main components of the budget when looking at the money going outside of the scale. Operating pays for all the day-to-day activities of the corporation. This includes items such as salaries and wages, utilities, supplies, fuel, and insurance, just to name a few. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or the rehabilitation of the current assets under the municipality's control. So let's focus on how the municipality collects to pay for all these services. For every dollar that comes into the municipality, 64 cents comes from property taxes, 6 cents from grants and subsidies, and 30 cents from user fees and other sources. So now we've learned what a budget is, how municipalities collect money, and how they spend it. Now, let's take a look at how these pieces work together. Money comes in through property taxes, grants and subsidies, and user fees. The money collected is required for both the operating and capital budget. We've already talked about the operating budget, including day-to-day expenses, but it also includes money for funding capital budgets. The capital budget pays for all the new big investments or the rehabilitation of current assets under the municipality's control. This connection is made through three methods. The capital levy method reflects a pay-as-you-go approach. The reserve fund method, which reflects a plan, save now, acquire, or use later approach, and the debt payment approach. Okay, so let's review. 1. A budget is a plan for money coming in and money going out. There are two building blocks to the municipal budget, operating and capital. 2. The operating budget is like paying your house bills to keep the lights on. Just like in a normal household, our bills go up with inflation. 3. The capital budget is like your major outlays, vehicles, house, renovations, etc. 4. Money comes in from three sources: property tax levy, user fees, and grants and subsidies. 5. Money coming in is used to deliver over 45 services to the residents of the municipality. 6. Council and administration, with the input of the public, decide how to best balance the municipal budget guided by provincial legislation. And that is how your municipality develops its budget.
Um,
I'm going to ask you a question.
you are.
Why is the provincial and federal government not held to the same standards of balancing budgets that the municipalities?
Thanks. I think we're good at balancing our budget. I actually am not sure why they're not. They should be, as far as I'm concerned, but they're not. And thank you for taking one of my comments in here. So we'll start with the next slide. Whoops. Yeah, you got it. So I'm just going to, this is the next few slides are just a summary of what was in the video. So our current expenses are generally the same year after year. For us, there are a few extra things that I can highlight for our operating expenses. We last year changed from using our gravel maintenance to through a capital. We've now put it into our operating budget. So that's about a $300 expense in our operating budget every year. Salaries and benefits does take up quite a bit of our expenses. Insurance, fuel, facility maintenance, and we also have the enterprise lease contract that we have in our operating budget. Next slide, please. Capital expenses, we do a lot of work when we're trying to plan for our budget. Our capital expenditures we review carefully and hope that we don't increase our budget astronomically. I know with COVID right now, our expenses have gone up quite substantially. For capital though, our examples for us would be large equipment purchases. We have like 2 snow plows that we've budgeted over the last couple of years so that we can pay for them. And that if we don't get it in the current year, it just goes to a reserve and we're able to take that money out of that reserve to cover it for the next year. Road construction, bridges is a really big major part of our budgeting. We have tons of bridges in municipality and they all cost a lot of money. Major building repairs and new building construction. Example, the library, and we had to fund it through debt and donations. Next slide. The current budget, known also as the operating budget, it actually is mandated under section 289 and 290 of the Municipal Act. And we have to include estimates of expenses and amounts like it has to be a balanced budget. It has to set out what we raise from taxation. So we determine our operating costs and then we anyway, it's culmination of the process that selects the priorities and establishes goals to be adopted by the municipality. The current budget and the capital budget have to run simultaneously together because a lot of the capital is funded by tax levy. Next slide. It should be noted that the Municipal Act doesn't require us to pass a capital budget during the year. However, new legislation, the municipal or like PSAP and long-term strategic planning and new requirements to meet grant funding, it's recommended that you pass a capital budget every year and you can try and budget into the future. It will assist us in long-term planning and it will assist us in both debt management and grant funding. Next slide, please.
Sorry, quick question. So you did mention library is a really good example. So when you're budgeting and you're dedicating X to the construction library, fundraising is part of that equation. How do you throw fundraising into the budget? Because you would never be sure you're going to get that full fundraising allocation.
So we estimate approximates. So for the library, for example, we would have estimated, hopefully we received $500,000 in funding. I believe actually it was a little higher than 500,000. But at the end of the day, because the library is a really good example because it was over a number of years. So each year we put that library back into the capital budget as a carry forward. And we show where we're contributing from the tax levy, which is in the current year, it's a tax levy. But if we don't spend that money for that project, it goes into reserves for the following year so that it can be spent on that specific project.
I think one of the best ways to explain it is, and we've highlighted, a budget is an estimate, what we believe to be that. The actual funding of it is when the project gets completed, And we do the final reporting and that. So I think because the grant funding ended up being more, that meant we had to take out less debt. So it just offset the other, but and there was continued reporting throughout the program to keep council up to speed on where we were at with regard to that. So
Next slide, please. As I stated before, the capital budget is linked to the operating rate by way of financing. This is done through tax levy, debt user fees, and grants. So if we budget, and like I explained before, if we budget for a project, even the bridge, Gillies Bridge, for example, we budgeted for it. It came back too high. So we knew we weren't going to spend it. We took all the money that we had budgeted in the current year and we moved it to the next year so that we could then improve and in essence, get more money the following year to offset the payments. But in that case, I think the original one was we were going to debt finance it. We ended up that we didn't have to debt finance. So when we budget capital, we budget it to be fully funded from some source. So whether it's reserves, it's capital levy, it's user fees, it's donations, or Side Road 7 coming up right now is a good example. We're budgeting for that whole project, but a part of that will come from the county because it's a county road. Next slide, please. And I think that's yours.
So part of our capital program as we develop that, I don't think it's going to be too difficult to say there's going to be a lot of hard choices. There's only so much money we have, only so much debt capacity we have, and our needs are significant. We spent as a director team a full day on Friday going through the first draft of the capital budget, and it was needless to say, with all of the things that we wanted to do, quite scary from a capital point of view. And that was, we were just talking about the capital side. We were able to work quite significantly, and really what it means is based on our capacity to pay and based on our potential increase, it means that projects are going to need to be pushed off. And it's like, so that evaluation goes to what can be pushed off to another year, what can be rolled over 2 years potentially to help fund it better. But really, we're just pushing things out because we know in 2 years' time, there's going to be even more projects. So just on making the hard choices, just wanted to highlight some things. As a municipality develops and refines our inventory asset management is going to be very important. And we're going to be having to have, there's a component of the asset management plan that will occur in 2025 that talks about our level of service. If you want to maintain or change your level of service, how much are you going to require to be raised to maintain those assets? So that's a very important question that we'll be working through this term of council. To me, it's probably the biggest thing that we'll be grappling with and dealing with, and every municipality deals with. We're not unique in this regard, every municipality. And to be honest with you, I think we may be better shape than some others. However, we have some assets that I think as far as bridges go, you heard Val speak to bridges. We have more bridges than most communities, significantly more bridges than most communities, and they're not cheap. So these are just some of the hard choices we're going to have to make. We'll have limited resources and we'll have to prioritize going forward. One of the things I want to highlight is our budget is a cycle. It never ends. When council approves that budget in January, February, hopefully February this year, we as staff start working at the following year and start building all of the background and looking at what we're doing. Not only are we implementing what's council's approved and start building on those. So we start with preliminary budgets, estimates, forecasts for the next year, as soon right after the budget's approved. Goes to detailed budget preparation. We bring it to council, there's deliberations, there's public consultation, and then that culminates with the budget being approved and tax calculations being done. So just to highlight the fact it's an ongoing process that staff live year long. Council just sees it at the end, but we continually work on that and to be prepared. Just our typical timeline, and when we're in election year, we don't have typical timelines. It always is delayed. I looked at 4 years ago after an election. The budget was tabled in February. You are going to be getting the budget on January 30th, barring any significant complications. But that's ahead of 4 years ago. So we like to be a little soon. Some people like us to be a little later than that. But that's our typically game plan. So we start creating the budgets in August. We typically bring a project framework, budget framework report. We didn't to the previous council because there wasn't a lot we basically knew the framework anyways that we were working under and didn't really need any direction. And then it would be this council dealing with the budget. We didn't want the previous council. Is it appropriate to them directing you on the budget to be receiving? Basically, everything you're getting will be in accordance with the current directions from council. So we know that we're increasing the roads by 1%, the bridges by 1%, contribution to capital, the facilities by 0.5%. So those were our starting points in deliberations of the budget. So basically following the framework and developing it, then we start our reviews in September and October generally. I talked about us being Friday looking at the capital. We go through quite an extensive process. Directors and myself as the CAO look at stuff to make sure that they're reasonable projects, that they're well explained and defendable, so that when they come to council, and then council will receive the budget in this, as I indicated in this time. I'll get through the timeframes. So that just sort of highlights a bit of the time frame. Staff typically draft 4 different budgets annually. We draft the tax supporting operating, the user pay operating, so that's the water and wastewater. They have a completely separate budget, the tax supported capital, and then the user pay supported capital. One of the key things that we're really finding that's driving a lot of the capital programs is where tax and user pay cross. And what I mean by that is a lot of times, example, the Algonquin Lakeshore Drive project, we receive funding to replace the water mains because they're really old. Well, if you're going to be ripping up the roads to do a new water main, then we're going to be doing a tax supported capital at the same time. And through the budget, you'll see a section, what we call combined infrastructure. And that's where we have the user pay capital and the tax supported capital under a combined, and you'll see the funding and how it's going to be funded. So there's a lot of times projects, and those are the big expensive projects. Those are the ones that are costing us a lot of money typically. So you'll see those. So this just explains a bit of a definition of what the tax supported operating budget is, and then what the tax supported capital budget is. Looks tax supported operating, the funding sources, as we've already talked about. It's tax dollars, user fees, could be a charge for a recreation program. So what we charge for people to use the community center or Meaford Hall, infractions, so penalties under bylaw enforcement, permitting under planning, and then licensing. So those are the fees. Under the tax supported capital, there's different funding sources from that. That conclude grants, as I mentioned, development charges. One of the principles that we have adopted is that development should pay for development. It shouldn't be the existing users paying to support. And that's primarily done through development charges. The majority of our new sewage plant will be funded from the collection of development charges. So each unit would pay a proportion of development charges. Obviously, that's a very hot topic right now with Bill 23 and your ability to collect your development charges from all forms of development. And we'll have to see how that plays out. I know that there was a letter from AMO or from the province to AMO saying they'll ensure that municipalities are kept whole, but we'll have to see the details on how they plan to do that. And because I can tell you, if we don't have development charges and we don't have provincial grants in relation to our expansion of sewage plant, I don't know how we're going to do it. Basically, we can't do that. So it'll be interesting. We have gas tax that comes back to us that we're allowed to use for some has to go to transit or specialized transit, but there's other portions that can go to roads. So we utilize some of those. We do have reserves. We do talk about debt for potential utilizing the capital budget. And we also have contributions from operating budget through the tax levy to help fund our capital program. You were supposed to. Yeah, next one.
Yep. I just, because our operating budget, our tax supported budget has a really huge component that is amount to be raised from taxation. I just wanted to give a brief overview of what assessments in general. The assessment, MPAC provides the assessments to the municipality. So every November we get a return roll, and that gives us the assessed values that are going to be used for the following year. The provincial government is responsible for their policies and provisions, and they're a not-for-profit organization. And when you look at your assessment, you have to look at the CVA, because that's the current value assessment of your property. Not everybody's CVA is going to be the same, and not everybody's house is exactly the same, and you have to determine. So even if my assessment stayed the same, my next door neighbor's assessment might have gone up. Currently, because of COVID, there's been a freeze in assessment. So everything on our assessment roll is based on a 2016 year. In talking to Anthony yesterday, he's hoping that maybe next year they'll announce that we're going to get a new reassessment. That hasn't come down from the province yet. That's all. You can, next slide, please. The other thing that we talk about when we talk about budgets is growth. So growth is the in-year assessment increases from building permits assessments even change because you purchased a house and the assessed value or the purchase price was a little higher. Sometimes that affects your assessment as well. So when we budget, we estimate based on a supplemental, which is your building permit increases. So for example, in 22, we budgeted 155,000 in new growth or a supplemental bill. What we came up with for 2022 was a $282,000 in growth, an in-year growth from assessment. So that does come into play when we calculate our tax rates, because we take our tax rates, we calculate our tax rates based on a new assessment every year that's received in November. I'm going to stop there and see if anybody has any questions on that.
So if I may, a figure in the 200,000s doesn't seem to bear any relation to $100 million in building permits.
No. So what happens with building permits? is your building could be taken out in 2021, but you may not actually finish your building until 2022. The assessment value doesn't come in until that is actually assessed and MPAC goes out and has a look at your property.
So can I just change the figures to something in the $200,000 to $300,000 range doesn't bear much relationship to $40 million in building permits, which is, I think, where we were 2 years ago or so. I just need to understand it. Rob, do you have a?
I'll just add a quick thing, because that's actually, your worship, you've brought up something that we often hear from the public too, right? I think the most sad but amusing one was that I saw a comment that someone thought that the municipality had received $100 million, right? And it's like, that's the valuation. So the permit fees are based on the cost, essentially, like, I'm super simplifying here, the cost of construction. So that $100 million that you referenced, that's the cost of construction from which we calculate our fees. Our fees are to cover the costs of the building division to do the work they do, inspections and all that. And then the assessment of the value for taxation, that's MPAC, and that's a whole different animal. There is obviously some relationship. The more expensive the construction, the fancier the home, the assessment, but the assessment takes into account a whole bunch of other aspects that we are not directly involved with. Everything from, is it on municipal infrastructure, the lands it's sitting on, et cetera, et cetera.
And I think when we talk about a building permit income or value, we also shouldn't forget that that's not necessarily all new assessment. We could be building $1 million home on a property that already had a house on it that's been demolished that was already valued at 700,000. And so, you know, your difference there is what counts, not the original value, because it's not like we're not taxing any of this land already.
Rob, did you want to speak first?
I basically, Matt said, like, it's if you had our $40,000 or $40 million of growth, what is the actual assessment of that? So if it's 20 new homes, typically you get what, 3,000 from home, of which half comes to us. So once you build that down of what your property taxes are, you could say, yep, that 282 or that 212,000 probably equates to what we should be getting from, once you take the assessed value, the mill rate, what we get of that, which is about 50% because of the county and education.
Yes,
it probably equates to that.
The film from London did not really deal with the county council or the school board at all.
That's
which,
true. Yeah.
Which makes that, 9% share even worse.
So Rob's example of the $100 million in 2021, but that's on economy of scale, because with recessionary or with purchase price changing, so that $100 million in 2021 might represent $90 million in 2022. So that number is actually fluid, debated based on that value, or are we getting that money immediately? $100 million in development fees or on development in 2021. Do we get that money that, if we're not getting that money that year, does that devalue then? Yeah, the following as it goes down.
So to understand, the building permit fee is based on a criteria of establishing value through our building permit system. So that's how we value. When it gets MPAC, they have a completely different system of determining the value, and that's what the taxes are based on. So I wouldn't even personally connect those building to permit fees and how much we're estimating value. That's almost construction value. As it gets to MPAC, we'll have a completely different system on how they determine value. So I wouldn't even correlate the two to be the same, especially when you heard Val say that current assessment is based on the 2016 year. So until they go through this whole process of bringing it up to today, then really they're evaluating based on 2016.
Yes.
One other point on that exceptional year we had with over the 100 million, that included a school. As far as I know, we don't get taxes from them, right? We're collecting their taxes for them. So that again, it doesn't directly relate to our tax income. It also, when it comes to residential, doesn't necessarily directly relate to increased population, right? It can just mean that you know, a $3 million home for one family is not the same as you know, 6 townhomes, right? It represents a difference there, right? So there's a lot of things where we're sometimes drawing direct lines of correlation that aren't there, right?
Yeah.
Your worship, if I may, to Val. I'm wondering, when you're sort of determining growth in the budget, are you using the growth management study from Grey County? And do we feel that our growth is kind of lining up with those projections, or no?
This is actual growth. So this is growth added. So it's not projected. That's not projecting it. This is actually what has happened. And so as
We take it right from the assessment values that I get off of MPAC.
So if you're looking to build the budget for 2023, are you projecting some growth into that budget just based on?
So in 2022, I calculated our growth, in-year growth for 2022 is being $282,000. So we'll build into our current 2023 budget, we'll build in an estimate of supplementals for 2023, but that growth number will come in to play when we calculate the tax rates. No. So the next slide. Yeah.
Just want to dirty the waters here a little bit. The question that Ross answered, I've struggled with for years. $100 million. That's at 1%. We're going to see a ton of money come in. You have to take into account the schools part of that. And it's a direct derivative of the impact assessment. And every person in this room looks at their impact statement. You wouldn't sell your property for what's on that statement. It's always half of what you would sell it for. So I don't know why it's that way. I don't know why it's not real time, but it is always half. So the $100 million, take the $30 million high school off it. It's 70 million, cut it in half. Now you're down to 35 million, and there's other derivatives there. It just doesn't make any sense to me, but it correlates down to this is what it really is.
Any other questions? Okay. No. The next slide. So the other thing I wanted you to look at is tax rates versus budget increase. It should be noted that if our budget increase is 10%, that doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to have a 10% increase on our tax rates. They're two kind of separate things. We have to look at what we need to operate as a municipality, what our revenues are that are going to help offset the operating costs, our user fees, our grants that we can use, possibly bringing money from reserves for that current year if we want to reduce it a little bit more. But we also have to look at what we want to consider in our budget as well, like service level delivery. Do we want to reduce that some, or do we want to keep it the same? And programs cost more to operate. Yeah, that's really all I wanted to just describe on that slide. Next one. So then we get into how our tax rates are calculated. So we get to our budget, we get a bottom line, and we're going to say last year it was $16 million and something for calculating our taxes. Then we take our return roll and we have to divide that by a weighted base assessment from MPAC. That comes into play, and this is where the county comes in. They provide us with tax ratios for specific, for example, residential tax is a 1, and everything commercial and industrial is anything above 1. Farmland is 0.218 currently. So those all have to be brought into play, and then you get a weighted assessment. That's how the tax rate is physically calculated. Then basically you take the assessed value from your property and you multiply it by our calculated tax rate. And that's what we're gonna raise from the individual taxpayer. Any questions? No. Okay. Then, oh,
Sorry.
that's okay.
Okay, a couple things. This is going back to our friends at Impact. 2016 was the last evaluation.
Yes.
Year. We're very, very close to 2023. We have a young lady in our community who works for Impact, and I was talking to her at campaign time. She mentioned she was doubtful there would be a reassessment in 2023. Now,
That's
I don't
possible.
know why Impact is waiting. And even if they reassess in 2024, are they going to go by 2024 figures, or
So it's,
are they going to go back to 2018, 2019? Do we have any indication of?
so I'm not MPAC, but I do know they would pick a date. So like they would pick a date, either whether it's January 1st, 2023. Those assessment notices won't go out till late September anyway, even if it was to happen. And I'm not MPAC, and the province sets when the new reassessment is going to come into play. That's the only answer I can give you on that.
Well, maybe I'm the only one, but I get the impression we're in a big gambling game here when it comes to like, this isn't Las Vegas, this is municipality.
So I don't, my opinion as not a financial person, not a tax person, is that we're not, because if assessments change, then our tax rates go down. If assessments go up, our tax rates go down. We still take the same amount of money. If everybody's assessment goes up 70% to make houses assessed at their actual value, then our tax rates will go down. So we take in the same amount of taxes in relation to that assessment. So to us, it doesn't really matter when or if MPAC actually do reassessment, as long as when they do reassessment, they do it consistently across all properties. Because if they reassess my property at being 70% more, but Rob's property at being 0% more, then yes, I'm going to be adversely affected. But if they reassess both of our properties at 70% more, then all of our tax rates can just go down because the math will work.
I believe that the next video will kind of help you understand that a little bit.
Property taxes are based on your home's value. What you might not know is that an increase in your home's value doesn't necessarily mean your taxes will go up. To explain, let's take a look at how property taxes are calculated. Imagine there's a town that only has 3 homes, and they're each worth a different amount. The total cost to provide all of the town's services is $1,200. This is collected through property taxes. Each homeowner pays property taxes based on their home's assessed value. So we take the total cost of services and divide it by the total property value. This tax rate is applied to all the houses to get enough money to pay for this town's services. Each homeowner pays according to the assessed value of their home. And every 4 years, the houses are reassessed. Let's say all 3 properties have gone up equally in value. The total cost of services hasn't changed, but the total property value has increased. When this happens, there will be a decrease in the tax rate. Now, when we apply that new rate on all the homes, everyone still pays the same. Now, let's say another 4 years has gone by, and these homes are reassessed. During this time, the house on the right gains more market value than the other 2. The total value of all the homes have increased, which means the town has to calculate a new tax rate. With this new tax rate, the first 2 homes will actually pay less than the home on the right that was reassessed at a higher value. Since the cost of services hasn't changed, the town doesn't need to collect more property taxes on the whole. However, since property taxes are based on a home's value, taxes for each individual home could potentially go up or down based on the rest of the homes. So what happens when the cost to provide services goes up? Well, it means more property taxes need to be collected from every home and new tax rate is calculated. To get the new rate, we take that amount that the town now needs and divide it by all of the property values. The new rate is applied to all the homes. Now everyone has to pay the new tax amount to continue to fund the town's services. So let's repeat. 1. Property taxes are based on the assessed value of a home. All assessments go up equally, everyone pays the same. 2. If all assessments do not go up equally, there's a redistribution of the tax. 3. If the town's cost to provide services increases, the municipality may choose to increase the tax rate. When this happens, everyone pays their share of that increase. And that explains the relationship between property value and property taxes.
Next slide, please. The other thing I wanted to identify is that when you get your tax bill, there's 3 components to that tax bill. One is your municipal levy, one is your county levy, and one is your education levy. We set our own tax rates, the county sets their own tax rates, and the Ontario government sets the education rates. Once those are done, that's when we determine a blended tax rate, and that's kind of what we use to say our taxes are increasing by. But we don't actually budget for any county fees in our budget. That we bill the county taxes and we remit them on a quarterly basis to the county. The same as education, we bill them on our taxes, but we remit education payments quarterly to the province. Any questions? Okay, next slide, please. So the other thing I wanted to kind of review is our reserves. So we have 2 different types of reserves. We have discretionary. Those are the ones that are by council direction, and they are for future expenditures as designated by council. They're comprised of tax supported and user rate. The other one is obligatory or statutory, and they are province legislated. And on the following page, there's examples of what they are. So for discretionary, we have kind of 2 types. We have rate stabilization. So we have one for water rate increases or a tax stabilization rate, an insurance rate, a winter control. If one year our winter is really bad and we haven't budgeted enough, we can then pull some money from reserves to help offset those increased costs. The other one for discretionary is capital, and that's for vehicle replacement, building rehabilitation, bridges, or road construction. The obligatory reserves that we have are the development charges, parkland, federal and provincial gas tax, and building permit reserves. So I might explain the building a little bit. So in the year, the building department we can't use their funds. If they have a profit in the current year, that amount of money has to be transferred to the building department reserve. But in the same token, if they can't fund all of their expenses in a year, we're allowed to take money out of that reserve to zero that budget. Any questions? Next slide, please. So currently the municipality has 12 rate stabilization reserves, 25 capital reserves, and 4 obligatory reserves. Next slide, please. The other item is long-term debt. And I personally don't like debt, so I struggle with this one. But because the municipality has a lot of capital projects and things that they can't pay and can't expect the users to pay or the taxpayers to pay immediately, we have to have some long-term debt. We have to base this and we have to determine our repayment limits based on the annual repayment limit that's provided by the government after our year end is complete every year. And I didn't look up the number, what our annual repayment limit is currently, and I apologize for that. However, managed debt is essential source of funding for our strategic planning, and managed debt and debt in general puts that capital cost off to future users, because it then becomes the repayment becomes back into the operating budget to offset, and new users of the system or new users or new taxpayers are helping fund those capital projects in the future. And all long-term debt should be approved by council. It's your turn. Yeah.
Or just for, so to talk about debt and municipal reserves just for a second. And I know that the municipality at one point in time was in rather less good conditions. Now that the reserves are where they are, is there some kind of strategic, and not a policy, but procedure in place that dictates when reserves get used? Because if you are sitting on reasonable reserves versus accumulating debt, some of that could be used, but I know you're also using robbing Peter to pay Paul long-term.
Exactly.
So where is that balance? How do you determine what that balance is in using reserve?
I think a lot of it is determined on what the reserve was set up for in the first place. I think also it's something that has to be done on a long-term basis. So currently, we're looking at getting a 5-year capital plan in place that we can determine when to use reserves or when to use debt. But right now, I can't say, yes, we should fund that from reserves and not debt. I think we have to be really careful with debt, because that's a long-term commitment that we have to be very cognizant of.
Could we possibly talk just briefly about surpluses? Because we don't usually find out about our surplus until, well into the spring, perhaps. And I'm sure councillors who've been around longer than I have and who are good at number crunching may have a question on this, but
yeah, I'll start with this. And so the reason why we don't state what the surplus will be is because the expenses are still coming in. Some expenses come in at the end of the year. And so we're still, we don't like to give a number and then it's changed. And so if we give a number, then there's been commitments being made to that funding. So we don't like to give that until we actually get to year end, know the number and do that. There will be some surplus this year, but I would tell you that we will have some significant, once we know that number, we will be bringing a report and directing where we believe that goes. I know that Val, I'll speak to it right now, is very concerned about the financial impact on this community as it relates to the education component of the PILT. It is in the neighborhood of 250 annual. 2 years, $250,000 a year of money that we're not getting from the education component of the PILT. Council recall that we were in disputes with the base, and that's all been resolved with regard to the actual PILT payment to us. But this is actually a battle that's going on right now between the provincial government, who tells us that we have to collect the education component, and that education component of the PILT comes right to the municipality. It doesn't go to education. We get to keep it. And we've been using this for years. And the federal government saying they shouldn't be paying the PILT because it's going to municipalities and not to education. It's a change in rate. Yeah, the provincial government and the federal government in this fight right now, at the end of the day, it's us that is out the money. And it's costing us $250,000. So we've set the previous 2 years money into a reserve from surplus and that to offset that. But it continues and hasn't been resolved and is quite concerning. There was a recent article. We're not quite as, we're bad. Other communities such as Kingston, Pembroke, Base-Borden, the community Base-Borden, Angus, some of them are on the hook for $5 million. in their budget annually. And it's concerning. Val keeps raising it. We keep highlighting it as part of the budget process, something to be aware of. We're putting, I think Val brought a report with that. And at the end of the day, we don't know what's going to happen. Is the provincial government going to say, if they lose, going to say, we'll cover you? Again, we don't know. But it's something that from a risk management point of view, as Val's doing, and she's highlighting that concern, and we're setting money aside to protect us, I guess, in that regard. And we quite conceivably will be recommending that we put that surplus into that reserve for that purpose.
I think Steve had a question.
Thank you, Ross. And I think I know where you're going with that. And you got to be very cautious. You can't use a surplus to offset a tax rate because it's a one-time amount of money. It's not ongoing every year. You have to use it for one-time funding. Having said that, I'm going to throw this out here, probably shouldn't. If this ends up being law that we have to pay that back on the education side, is the municipality in a position that they could ask impact for a reassessment of the base property?
Yeah, it's all federal property.
Sure, but for us,
The big thing is
I would have to think if impact actually got up on the base, that the assessment up there would be much higher than it is, and we would be the benefactor of that.
I think we would need to look at the agreement that was.
We'll
entered
talk
into.
later.
Yes. The next slide is exactly, you presented it, so I'll just maybe jump on to the next one. Councilor Bartley. This is basically, no, it's good. It's just highlighting that fact as we find out that when we get one-time funding, so whether it's a surplus or whether we get a grant, we need to use those for special projects, because if we use them to offset our operating, then it's going to even hurt us even more the following year, because those are ongoing expenses that funding disappears. So we have to make up what we've lost and then some on the increase. So as we go forward, and if we have those surpluses, if we have that one-time funding, we need to ensure that it's on special projects. That's just a 1 year special, in addition to our normal budgeting, I think. And that's consistent with, I think, what Steve was just saying. So the last few slides, I'm going to basically just show how the budget gets presented to the council and to public when we table the budget. So we start with the previous year's budget. What was the base tax supported budget? So when we presented it for the 2022 year, this is how it was presented. We started up with a 2021 operating base budget was 15.5 million. The base budget increase. So, and then there'll be a slide that talks about all those expenses that we're told that we have to increase. So typically you get a base budget increase of 5.53%. And that's based on your insurance going up, utilities going up, those uncontrollable expenses. Our Grace-Hobble levy, those different things, and we identify that in a slide. In this particular instance, you see, because we moved the road, we did some adjustments on the road capital where we moved the granular road resurfacing from capital to operating. It resulted in a change. Our bridge capital funding, so this is the 1% for bridges, and the road capital funding, typically that would be 1%. However, we did an adjustment to move granular to operating, so it ended up being less than 1%. We still had the capital funding. It was reflecting, there was an in and out on the granular that adjust that, but normally that would be around 1%. The facility capital funding is 0.5%. And then our general capital funding went up 1% or 0.89%. So the requested budget at that point in time was 16.6 million. which resulted in we needed an additional 6.9% of funding to handle our operating budget. So that's on the tax support. So that's how it typically gets presented. Just on the left side there, you'll see we include budget assumptions, what's included. So depending on what council does on Monday, we would identify this includes either 1% or another percent of COLA. We'll also identify what's not in here. So what council needs to be aware of, that even with the 6.96%, what's not included, and then where we are at with requested budget. Highlight the capital program and where all of our funding. So last year, we were looking at 9.6 million in tax supported capital. So that's not the water and sewer. And then it just highlights where it goes. You can see significant portion went to bridges and roads, and then as you're going through the different list. The big thing that will, and then how we intend to fund those capital projects. So how much is going to be coming from the levy? How much is going to be coming from reserves? And a lot of times when we're talking about it here, it's coming from reserves because it was a project that was maybe funded over a few years. So we put some money away, or it might have been, so when we received the PILT funding a few years ago, we put money, but said it's going to go to these projects when they come forward. So then they would be pulled out of reserves at that point in time. How much is federal gas tax? How much grants and subsidies? So that's like our OMPF funding that we get annually. Other grants that we're aware of. How much of these projects is being funded from development charges? How much is going to be debt? And you can see that's a big part of the, I can't remember what that one was. The library for that one last year, I think. And then how much is through donations. So that's how we identify the funding of the capital program. Similar on the user pay, 2021, we talk about what the expenditures are, what the capital program is. Council, as required by our license, needs to develop a plan for our capital replacement and operating on the water and wastewater. And if you look at that plan, some years it says it should be 20%, some years it should be 4%, but it says, you know what, do 8% annually and you'll be able to deal with your long-term needs. The only way to change that is really getting more users on the existing system or intensification. And that's the only way to deal with that. So typically that's where we come with the water and wastewater. And just confirming the dates, we'll be tabling the budget on January 30th. We do have the public meeting on February 8th. We will be having our budget days, and unfortunately we couldn't do the budget days because we were into COVID last year, shut down the beginning of the year. So we had to postpone those budget days last year. We find them very advantageous to go through in detail, and especially with the new council, we think we're looking forward to returning to those again this year. We even have identified additional third day should we need it. We want to make sure we spend the necessary time to go through the budget in detail. Having the statutory public meeting. So once council is following those budget days, is ready to confirm a budget to council, we'll have the public meeting on March 20th and then approval on March 27th. I guess I said earlier February, I guess I was meaning March this year. And that's, council can approve it if there's no significant changes between the budget days, the public meeting and final approval. If council wants to make some significant changes, we need to evaluate that, but we may need to go back out to the public and do that. There's one other public meeting that we need to look at, and it's following the presentation of the fees and charges on Monday. We're going to be looking at potential public meeting in January because we have to have it for the building code fees. So we'll have to schedule a public meeting and probably in January, and it'll probably be tied to, I think we were talking potentially the night of the planning public meeting in January. So potentially for that. We haven't confirmed that, but that's sort of what we're looking at. And that concludes the budget presentation.
Any other questions before we move on? Rob?
That one slide in there that said the long-term, when you were explaining the breakdown, it said long-term debt was like the 780,000 was the example in that year. I presume that includes things like the Meaford Hall ongoing payment, or like we're on the hook for that for another few years. Where does that come out?
That would be the new debt. That the Meaford Hall long-term debt would be over and operating debt in the payment, right? No. So Meaford Hall long-term debt is operating payment. So it's a
In the Meaford Hall facilities budget.
Okay.
So the library budget next year, or not, it's actually the library facility budget will include the repayment of the.
Okay.
So is your plan to present customer service and communications now or later after lunch? Okay, so are we ready to break for lunch? So be it. Thank you.
Or we have to.